didn't even notice I was there. Oh, I bet the atheist isn't going to show up, and atheism is garbage, and all this other stuff. And so, I got that feel from it. But I'm not going to hold that against Jay. But I did ask him to, try. I said, you don't necessarily have to come up with a rigid, syllogism, but get as close to something that's an argument form, because the more conversational this is, the easier it is to hide hidden premises and make, have it be confusing to follow. Now,
Yeah.
I also don't want to make sure that I don't accuse Jay of being intentionally obfuscating. It's clear from watching the way he thinks and the way he talks that he and I have some similarities, because I'll talk for days and I'll go off down 10 rabbit trails. And so at the one point where there's a point where he says, yes, let me see if I can put this in syllogistic form for you. And he starts to talk about it, and he gets premise one kind of out, although it's not clear, and then immediately goes off in this. And I'm just, I sat there and was baffled. I was like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. And so I think if Jay watches this, that what would be really helpful for other people wanting to engage with his version of tag, because he's obviously spent a lot of time thinking about it. He has a lot to say. He's very articulate. Right? Don't think he's an idiot either. It just, what would be really helpful would be, write it down, figure out. I mean,
he explained to them at length. He wrote it down in a deductive syllogism. If A, if A, then B, therefore A.
It's so silly. I mean, there's also the transcript. So what are you talking about? Like, just go back in the transcript. You want it written down. It's already written down. Like, how silly.
Well, I suspect that they either can't comprehend it or they do understand it and they want to talk about other things. Because if they do understand it, they realize they can't overcome it.
Yeah, they're like trying to give him teaching tips.
Yeah, I know.
For what? Like, write this. It's so silly. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're talking about you and your own resources. And again, this transcript's available. Just go get it. It's so silly. It's weird. It's like a pat on the back, a psychic to cushion. You know what I'm saying? It's weird.
No, it'd be for optics, because they have a fan base. These are considered top tier atheists, so they want to present as though like they're being baffled, they're being bamboozled, and they're going to teach Jay something. But really, they haven't. All they've said, 6 minutes is like, what's the argument? I don't understand it. That's all they said.
I don't know what it's very good. It's that's the more messed up thing, is that they're saying, oh yeah, he's very serious, but I can't understand what he's saying. Like, what type of backwards compliment is that? Like, because you can't comprehend, so how do you know it's good? It could be a really shitty argument, but you have no way to verify if it's good because you don't understand it. Like, they're just acting like it's decent enough. Like, they should, but they have no knowledge that it's good at all. Like, because they just, you see, it's so silly.
Yeah.
If you've got an argument, you should know, say, how many premises there are. Like, how many premises are there in the argument? 3, 15, 25? Like, he should know that. He should be able to say, okay, this is premise 1, this is premise 2. Like the Kalam cosmological arguments, the 2-premise argument is very simple. Ed Facer has a argument from contingency. It's like 52 premises, whatever. Fine, they're completely different types of argument, but they've gone through it and they've written it down properly. And then you can look at it and work out what's going on. I think if Jay wants to, if you want to say that you have an argument, that's what you have to do. You have to have an argument. What is an argument? It's a series of premises.
Okay, so like, yeah, they're wanting Jay to do like premise, conclusion, so they can analyze the argument or something. But so this kind of goes back to like in philosophy, there's 2 different schools of thought. There's analytic philosophy. And in analytic philosophy, they do like syllogisms, like premise, conclusion. Then there's continental philosophy, and they don't really do syllogisms in continental philosophy. And so what Van Til is doing is continental philosophy. So he's not, it's kind of like missing we can put it in a syllogism, but they're kind of like missing the point, because what we're doing with tag, we're not trying to demonstrate like a specific fact. We're trying to demonstrate that facts are demonstratable in the first place.
Right. Yeah, it's a meta level argument, a paradigmatic argument, and they don't understand those types of arguments because they've just assumed their way past those.
They're thinking of like, we're trying to conclude with a specific, this is true, this fact is true, but Tag is just trying to conclude with, it's possible to prove things because of these metaphysics, which would be Christian.
Right. So they just want to assume that, and I'm trying to figure out if they really don't understand that's what he's doing, or they're just trying to work around it. I don't know.
Well, Malpass is trained in philosophy, but he's trained in analytic philosophy, but he knows about continental philosophy. He knows more than me. So I don't really get it, I guess. I don't know.
And it's like you said, you can put it in a simple deductive syllogism, even though you wouldn't classify it as a simple deductive argument. But what I'm wondering is why, since Malpass and Dillahunty have talked to him at length, why haven't they even looked that up before this discussion?
And in fairness, I mean, Jay Dyer did not present a syllogism. He did more of an informal presentation. And Darth's critique of Jay Dyer was like, he's more trying to do like a college lecture rather than like be polemical and sort of rhetorical and like attack his opponent more. So
I've seen him put it in a syllogism. I just think that
and this debate, what I remember, he didn't. From what I remember, I watched this debate like twice. And I don't remember him. I remember he was asked for a syllogism and he sort of like rambled a bunch of run-on sentences. So he didn't like, it wasn't like a clear like premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. It was like he kind of did it informally. So I don't know. But
season a conclusion.
Yeah, so like it is just weird that they're kind of like always like, oh, what's the argument? I don't see the argument. So I think what happens is they can't really think outside the box, right? That they're just totally locked in their worldview, their way of thinking, and they can't even like fathom any other way, like starting from revelation as opposed to starting from their own mind. Like they can't think outside their own mind. They can't think outside the box, I think, is what happens. And
that's where I'm kind of sort of teetering, because I think that they can, but I think once they start to do that, they realize that all that they've been promoting up to this point can be overtaken by a simple idea, like the assumptions and the presuppositions that they've been just glossing over. Like if somebody challenges that, then they're in trouble. I think they probably can acknowledge that, but they don't. They just want to write that off as silly. Why would we? I've heard Graham Oppie say that, like it's silly to think about those things. Like that's his answer. Oh, because you can't give an explanation, you don't have an argument against them, you just write them off or call them silly or say that everyone just assumes. But, as he was pointing out with Matt, like, where is assumption in the skeptical position? Where does that fit in, right?
I mean, until you've got that, you kind of don't have an argument. He's got a lot of ideas. He's got we can talk about what we think he's thinking about, but I kind of want to say you don't have an argument until you can say it as a series of premises and a conclusion.
Yeah, he kind of poo-pooed both Cy 10 Bergenkate, and I think reasonably so. I kind of slipped on Cy a little bit as well, but also Matt Slick. And the one thing I can say about Matt, who contacted me just a couple weeks ago, he was going to be in Austin, but I didn't hear back from him. If you go to his website, carm.org, you will find a structured argument for his version of Tag. Now, it may be an awful mess full of holes, but at least he's put this together. And I think it would be in Jay's best interest to just throw that up somewhere, because if somebody comes to me, we talk about categories of arguments. There's ontological arguments, moral arguments, et cetera. And if somebody says,
what they do with the syllogism, right, is they claim it's circularity. And God is the necessary precondition for immaterial things we rely on, like logic and morality. Since we rely on these things, God exists, they call it circular. But this is where they can't get out of the box. You're saying like it's just a simple deductive fact. They're talking about a meta level idea, a paradigmatic argument.
Says, oh, what's the Kalam cosmological argument? It's not even an argument for something that I accept or believe in, and yet I can rattle it off virtually word for word. Everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe has a cause for its existence, therefore the universe began to exist. That's the entirety of the Kalam cosmological argument. And anybody who's well-versed in this stuff can rattle that off the top of their head. If you've come up with a novel version of an argument, I'd say the first responsibility is to put it in a at least really close to proper syllogistic form so that people can look at it, and then it doesn't feel like propaganda.
Yeah, that's right. And so one last thing then is just that we'll come back to this hopefully at some later point, but there's two ways that I can think of that you could turn what Jay was saying into an argument. At least there are two versions of this sort of transcendental argument I can see, and they have different problems with them. And we can come back to this, so remind me to come back to this if we don't naturally get to it. But I want to try and explain two different ways of putting it and why it's important to make sure that what your opponent is saying, like which one of these is it? They suffer from different types of problems. You have a completely different discussion depending on which one it is that they're presenting. It wasn't clear which one Jay was presenting, so we'll come back to that. So I've said far too much about what I think, and we should hear what Ozzy thinks, because yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if Ozzy's ready to chime in on that, or the things that struck him most about the debate.
Sorry, I was just having a little difficulty unmuting there. I guess I'm going to echo some of these sentiments already. I mean, I was somewhat struck by the difficulty that Jay had in expressing his argument as an argument, as a formal argument. I mean, transcendental arguments are deductive arguments, so they should have premises, and you should be able to state what the conclusion is. I mean, his conclusion should be something.
A transcendental argument is distinct from a deductive argument because there's four reasons it's distinct. Okay, so like one is it concludes with a transcendental. Deductive arguments could never conclude with a transcendental without like begging the question. Two, it's there's inherent circularity in the argument because you're concluding with a transcendental. So there's a little inherent circularity. In deductive arguments, there's no such inherent circularity. There's also an auxiliary argument because you're making two arguments at the same time. You're also making a reductio. And typically in a deductive arguments don't rely on an auxiliary argument like a transcendental argument. I'm forgetting the fourth distinction. But anyways, they are distinct from deductive arguments. He's incorrect on this.
Well, it's a meta level argument. That might be the final distinction, right? It's not a simple fact that it's proving transcendental about all facts and the necessity.
Well, when I say it concludes with a transcendental, that's the same as saying it's meta level. I forget what. So it concludes with a transcendental. It's inherent circularity, auxiliary argument. I can't remember the fourth distinction. It's not super important, but it is distinct.
So yeah, these guys are having trouble understanding it because they don't. I guess they just didn't take the idea of transcendental arguments seriously in whatever they studied. But that doesn't make it invalid. They're just so far just saying, yeah, I don't really understand.
Oh, I remembered the fourth distinction. Deductive arguments are linear. A transcendental argument is nonlinear. So nonlinear concludes with a transcendental, requires an auxiliary argument, and is inherently circular due to the fact that you're concluding with a transcendental. So this makes it distinct.
Okay, thank you for that. That's good.
Like God exists, or the God of Christianity exists, or something like that. The premises are up to him how he gets there, but there should be some, more than one premise, and you should be able to specify what the inference rule or inference rules are that get you from the premises to the conclusion. So that was one. And I mean, I know what it's like sometimes when you have.
You could literally use every single. I actually have a tag in every single inference rule, so you can use it doesn't really matter. Like you could formulate it in any way you want. So I don't know what he's really saying here.
A kind of a complex set of ideas, and you can sometimes have an inchoate argument, and it's very hard to articulate it. And so if you're put on the spot and say, "Hey, listen, can you just lay it out in as a in modus?"
He didn't even say incoherent, right? But he's trying to imply that Jay has an incoherent argument. That's the problem he's having here.
They're trying to. I mean, Alex Malpass said he's not trying to do this, but it seems like there's. Oh, it's this big mystery. Where's I can't find the argument. It's like, where's Waldo? Yeah. It's like, where's Waldo?
Yeah, if they could just find it, everything would be fine. But so it just becomes kind of like point out that Jay
This should be the "Where's Waldo" fallacy.
I know what it's like sometimes when you have a kind of a complex set of ideas, and you can sometimes have an inchoate argument, and it's very hard to articulate. And so if you're put on the spot and say, "Hey, listen, can you just lay it out in as a in modus tollens form or something like that?" I might, oh, geez, I don't know how to put that in modus tollens form. I'd have to think about it for a while. I might not be able to do it, right? It's so live in a conversation. It's
the next time someone goes, "What's the argument for that?" I'm gonna go, "That's the "Where's Waldo" fallacy."
That's cool. Yeah, man. There's logical fallacies being born every day. So do it.
Yeah.
It can be a little bit unreasonable to ask a person.
I told you about what Wildheart invented, right? The straw mannequin.
The straw mannequin. Yeah.
He said, "Argue with me. I want you to argue with me, but pretend I don't have a worldview."
Well, that's kind of just a straw man, but he's just said it funny.
No, the mannequin part is I'm talking to a live person who wants me to treat him like a mannequin, a dummy. You see? He's asking me to pretend that he's a dummy. He's a mannequin.
Okay.
Yeah. To do that, right? But I mean, I think he's been at this for a while, so I would have expected, like
everyone has a worldview. Because everyone has a worldview, so it's like, act like I don't have a worldview. It's like, okay, I'm treating you like I'm talking to the wall or like a rock or something.
Yeah, a dummy, a mannequin, sure. So the thing about that is he's going to get me to talk to him like he doesn't have a worldview, and then he's going to start responding to what I'm saying, and suddenly he's going to pop back in.
I point out this contradiction to people, and it's like they don't care. It's funny. Like
that's the thing. It's not that's what I try to delineate. Is whether they don't care or whether they don't know, because those things they seem to both be different.
A guy today said, "Well, I'll just have an impersonal ultimate, right? An ultimate that's not a mind." Because if they say they have an ultimate that's a mind, that's game over. Now they're at least a theist. You've got them at least to theism. So I go, well, if the ultimate doesn't have a mind, then like what we call reason would reduce to like a blind process at base reality. And so there's nothing to aim or reason at truth as opposed to survival. And then he kept like denying the contradiction that like he kept saying like, well, no, reason is aimed at truth, but then it reduces to a non-mind. Well, how can a non-mind see? You need a mind to have aboutness, right?
Sure. He's trying to posit in an answer when you're requesting his ultimate. This is what he's doing there.
His aboutness emerges from non-aboutness. It's a contradiction. And
it's the same as evolution, life coming from non-life.
Well, I'd have to think about that. That I don't know about.
Well, I mean, that's what it does rely on. They just
skip past like when Bonson says they try to get the rational from the irrational. So it's a contradiction, but it's a performative. So I don't know. They don't get it, but
some structured argument that he could present, because he's got other content on his channel about the transcendental argument for God's existence. So he's not a newcomer to it. So I would have expected that, and I was surprised to discover that Alex had discussed this with him some months ago, and that they had discussed the same argument. And so I watched that just this morning to see, well, maybe he presented the argument there, but there was the same difficulty there. What exactly is the argument? What are the premises? So yeah, that was certainly difficult, and it was difficult for two reasons. It was difficult for those of us who want to understand what his argument is, but then it's very hard to object to the argument, because almost anything you say is can be construed as a straw man, as not addressing the argument. Right?
Yeah, it's hard to object to the argument because you can't just go nuh-uh. It's anti-skeptical.
Yeah.
In bare bones, the argument is like the Christian worldview has a defeater for skepticism, God's revelation. Non-Christian worldviews lack a defeater for skepticism, fall victim to skepticism. Therefore, to the impossibility of the contrary, we have to accept the Christian worldview, because skepticism would be a contradiction to say I can't know anything.
Yeah, epistemic justification gone, non-existent. Yeah, Aussie man here. It sounds like he gets the argument, because he's saying like, "Oh, I'm trying to find the argument," and then he also says it's very hard to overcome. So how does he get to the conclusion it's very hard to overcome if he doesn't get the argument?
It sounds like he's just whining that he has no response.
Yeah, right.
Right, but I mean, it's it's a little bit like shadow boxing or something like that. Almost anything that you erect as an objection is likely to just smack of being a straw man, right? But I mean, I think the fault for that lies with Jay in this instance. Did we want to say anything about what a transcendental argument is for the audience? I mean, not everyone will be familiar with the expression, perhaps. I don't know.
You know who this Aussie guy is?
A little bit?
Do I know who he is?
Yeah, the guy below Alex. You know Alex.
Aussie man, he's just considered a high-tier atheist.
He has a master's in philosophy. So you got a PhD in philosophy and a master's in philosophy, and then a thumb that looks like a person.
Right.
Between these three, we can't figure it out.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Aussie man just kind of alluded that he does understand it, while saying he doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, they're claiming they don't. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's great, because there's dishonesty going on here, and that's a lot of what happens with atheists. As they say, the transcendental argument or presuppositionalism is dishonest. They try to flip that around. So that's great to hear.
Since they're both academically trained, they have no excuse to say, like, I mean, they could look at the literature. Now, I know it's not like very much. There's not a lot of literature about it, but it's like, why don't you just look into the literature? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, because if they did, they go, well, yeah, we can't say they're not applicable, or we can't just deny them outright. So maybe they did look into it and they just kind of don't mention it. I think Graham Oppie got into that discussion. I don't know if you know who that is. He's another philosophy professor.
I talked to William Lane Craig about how Craig was trying to get him to explain how logic is necessary, and he was like, well, it's just a brute necessity. And then Craig was like, well, that doesn't seem very like satisfying.
Yeah. Brute facts. I think Oppie was just saying, well, we don't really care about transcendental categories and arguments. It's just kind of, we don't need to worry about that. He was saying something like that. It was just.
Well, he's right. In academia, they don't really care.
True, but this is what happens, and this is why Matt called these guys, because he's been so confident. He goes and sits down with Jay Dyer, and he gets blown away. So he's like, "What's up, guys? Help me out with this." And they're just like, "Well, we don't really know either."
I think that'd be great if you want to do that. I've got a handful of notes on specific, semi-specific things that came up during the debate. I don't know how much was specific during that debate on either side. But yeah, if you want to go through kind of.
Did you see my clip when Derek Mythvision ran tag on Alex Malpass? Did you see that clip? That was funny. And Malpass just said, "Don't answer the question." Basically.
Oh no, I didn't. But I've heard Malpass say that you answer with toast.
I'll show you that clip sometime. I'll have to remind me. It's pretty illuminating.
Yeah, you just don't answer, and then what happens?
That's what he says. He says, "We just go, I don't know." But that doesn't.
That isn't their actual epistemology. I don't know.
ignoring the argument. Yeah, the Church of I don't know. But then
so
they get
the I don't know is here to tell you that your argument's wrong, but they're not quite sure, but they're maximally sure. Is that how that goes?
so like it's like my pastor said. It's like we don't have to be afraid to talk to people because we have truth, and they don't. Like straight up.
Right, they don't have that commitment. They're committed to I don't know, which they try to construe as like noble and honorable to say I don't know. It's okay to say I don't know.
Or they say it's a virtue, like we're humble and stuff. That's insane.
Which the virtue gets called into question from their position.
Being a fool is a virtue. It's crazy, dude.
Well, what is a virtue from a skeptic, from an empiricist? It's just an imagined idea at best, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't hold any ethical weight because they have a subjective ethical system. So that I don't know combined with the subjective ethic, it's devastating. They haven't caught on to this yet, or they don't accept this.
Like a rundown of transcendental arguments as a category and how they're generally used, perhaps in a more sense.
Sure. And Alex is more expert on this, so I mean he'll correct me or refine anything I have to say. But as I said earlier, transcendental arguments they're deductive arguments, and they've traditionally been used to refute things like skepticism. Kant famously did this, and others have done it. And so skeptical claims like solipsism, idealism, those nightmare skeptical scenarios like I'm a brain in a vat, maybe I'm a brain in a vat, or I'm living in the matrix. How would I vitiate those possibilities? Well, there have been arguments put forward.
I said sorry. I was making noise. I thought my mic was muted.
Okay.
For centuries, to try to get around these sorts of skeptical considerations, right? So let me give you a simple, kind of the lunk-headed version of a transcendental argument. Okay, this one will have two premises and one conclusion. So premise one will be, well, in almost any transcendental argument will take this form. Premise one will be something like there exists some fact about our mental life, okay, which is incontrovertibly true, okay, that we would all agree to, okay, and premise two would be something like, in order for that fact about our mental life to exist.
So in his example right now, premise one requires an agreement from everybody. That's where he's starting.
Some other would be mental life, okay, which is incontrovertibly true, okay, that we would all agree to, okay, and premise two would be something like, in order for that fact about our mental life to exist, some other fact about reality would have to be the case. So the idea is that whatever that fact is,
it's almost like he knows the argument.
Yeah, he suddenly does.
Premise one about our mental life that's incontrovertibly true is it presupposes or requires some other state of affairs. And so if it's true that we have a certain feature of our mental life, then that other fact that makes
this is actually this is more like I think maybe a Kantian. So there's two ways to do this. There's a modest transcendental argument, which is what Kant did, where he says, well, we have to think a certain way. And then with Van Til, we're doing a performative transcendental argument. We're saying the world metaphysically has to be a certain way. So it's a little bit different, but
yeah, I like to think of it like Kant, like sort of is known for transcendental categories, although they go back to Aristotle, but Kant is well known. Like he got the plane off the ground, and I think Van Til was actually able to land it.
They might be confusing the difference.
What's that?
They might not be sure about this distinction between the modest and the performative transcendental arguments. There's a distinction. There's two different types.
Yeah, I'm pretty
I would
sure.
say modest transcendental arguments fail. They don't really, because they only prove something is true conceptually. We're trying to prove something's true in reality with tag. So it's different. Kant, transcendental idealism, that was a whole school of thought. There's transcendental idealists, I think Hegel. So they would say that the world is just our perception. It's like phenomena. It's like the world is mental.
Yeah, right. So Kant thought there was a noumenal realm and a phenomenal realm, and we did
They
didn't have access to the noumenal realm, but he was trying to utilize it in his transcendental argument, saying there's an objective reality, but also saying there's no access to it.
No, but that's what he was. So he was ignoring that in his argument. So he was saying it's just conceptual. This is just conceptually true, whereas we're trying to say this is actually true. So this is like the difference. It's a subtle difference.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like Kant was moving in the right direction. He got the plane off the ground, but Van Til's able to land it, to ground it, so to speak, to have grounding for the argumentation.
Yeah. So the way Bonson put it is Kant takes Hume's problem and he makes the problem an answer, where he goes, "You're right. We're skeptical of this external world, but we have to conceive of the world a certain way. It's impossible." He argues it's impossible to not conceive of the world this way, or something like that. So it only gets to the conclusion is true in a conceptual sense, that it just demonstrates that we have to think like induction, for example. David Hume would say that's a habit of the mind or something. Well, Kant would say this is a transcendental necessity, that induction is necessary for human thought, human experience. So you can't help but think inductively. It's like impossible. It's like impossible to conceive of like humans that don't use induction or something, right?
Yeah, right. If they try to argue it, you can point out how they're thinking inductively within trying to argue it, for instance.
But that just gets you to like, well, it's conceptually necessary, but it doesn't mean it's like connecting anything to the noumena or whatever, right?
Right. The transcendental argument for the Christian God is going to unify. It's going to complete the argument that Kant was getting to. But Kant on his own is just floating there.
Yeah, they wanted to abandon truth, really, I guess, and say it's like unknowable. Because that is I think that's what Hume and Kant realized, that we're just guessing at reality. We don't really know the world in a non-arbitrary way. That's what Hume's arguments demonstrated. And Kant was devastated by this, and so he comes up with transcendental idealism, which is, I guess, in his mind, solves the problem. It's like a secular way to solve the problem, but it just ignores the problem.
Yeah.
True. Otherwise, that feature of our mental life wouldn't exist. Okay. So premise one is there exists some fact about our mental life which is incontrovertibly true. Premise two is in order for that fact about our mental life to exist, some other fact about reality has to be the case, and therefore that other fact about reality is the case. Okay. So let me flesh it out with a more specific example. Let's use the example of knowledge. Right. Premise one might be it is possible for us to know certain things. We know certain things about the world around us. Let's say that everyone accepts that's the case. Now, if that's true, okay, in order for it to be the case that I can know some fact about the world around us, it would mean that.
But why does he keep using the language, let's just assume everyone's accepting that? Do you notice that? He's waiting for that to be accepted. Do you have any idea why he's doing that, saying it that way?
Sorry, how did he say it?
He said it before too. The first premise he keeps saying, as long as everyone agrees. Like this is showing I think showing how he relies on dialectics, like agreements, logical agreements to get to quote truth. Because why would his argument need everyone to agree?
Yeah, so when they're talking about agreeing, they always remember I brought this up in the past where I talk about they always want to bring up what we agree on. Notice how they do that a lot. But we both agree logic is true. We both agree logic works. So agreement isn't the same as giving an account. So,
sure.
So what this is they're trying to retreat to neutral territory. We both agree logic is true or works or something.
Yeah. So let's not have any questions about justification. Whereas the Christian says, well, no, I agree with you, but I'm still going to challenge your justification of why that's the case.
when you're a secular philosopher or you're going to debate, you have to do that. You have to go, okay, let's agree prior to the debate that like the PSR is true, because this argument will only work if we agree XYZ. All of their arguments are like that. All of their arguments are like, you have to agree on XYZ principles, and then my argument works. They have to do that every time. Because notice they go, well, I could just take this view. Well, I could just take that view, and this view, and that view, and woo-da-woo-da-woo-da-woo-da-woo-da-woo. They never, it's just, because it's all like postmodern. That's the postmodernism, denying absolute truth.
Yeah, no commitment.
Relativism. They're demonstrating tag. That's what we say. If you deny God, now we don't have any way to settle any debate, because it could be anything. We're just guessing at reality now.
Yeah, that's the beauty of seeing that. Nice.
With a more specific example, let's use the example of knowledge, right? Premise one might be, it is possible for us to know certain things. We know certain things about the world around us. Let's say that everyone accepts that's the case. Now, if that's true, okay, in order for it to be the case that I can know some fact about the world around us, it would mean that there is a world around us about which we can, in principle, have knowledge. Therefore, there is a world around us about which we can know things. That is a transcendental argument, okay? Now, you can challenge whether or not that's a good argument or not, but that is an example of what we mean by a transcendental argument. And maybe I should turn this over to Alex to see if he's got some thoughts that he introduce here.
Yeah, so I think that's I agree with all of that. I think that transcendental arguments don't have to be about combating skepticism, although they normally are. So the idea is that they go back basically to Kant, sort of non-controversially. They go back to Kant anyway. So
I don't know why he would say that. They're literally anti-skeptical arguments, and the whole point, Kant, he was trying to defeat Humean skepticism. So I don't know what. But Malpass, honestly, he knows more than me, so he's probably like thinking about something that I'm dumb on. So, but that's strange to me, from what I know. But he knows more than me about philosophy in general, so I don't know.
Kant's his major philosopher in the Enlightenment German guy who's responding to this kind of skepticism of Hume, who tries to do something about Hume's arguments. He thinks that can't quite be right. There must be some way we can have certain types of knowledge, and he comes up with a way of arguing, this sort of novel way of arguing, which people think of as transcendental method. He calls it transcendental as well. And what he's doing is fighting skepticism, and he thinks that there's certain things about, just like Ozzy said, certain for our mental life to have certain character, certain things would have to be the case. Our mental life does have that character, therefore these things that our mental life requires for it to be that way must be true. So the textbook one would be like, we have to think of the world as if there's a causal ordering to the things around us. Otherwise, our experience.
Otherwise, what happens to science?
Would be a big mess, an unconnected mess. They wouldn't be able to. There'd be no significance to any of the shapes and sounds that was our experience, unless there was a causal ordering to those shapes and sounds. And lo and behold, our experiences aren't just a big booming, buzzing mess, right? They do have structure, right? So that means, says Kant, that causal ordering that we give to our experiences is required. There must be that causal ordering. Now, crucially though, Kant doesn't think that you can say that the world is like that. He thinks that what we're saying is that what's necessary is the way that our experience is structured.
So there's your point about the conceptual to bringing it into a unified reality, right?
So it's a fact about experience in the first place that it's not a big booming confusion. And then the fact that we can deduce from that is that there's a kind of a way that our experience has to be. It couldn't be different from that, right? So it's not possible to have coherent experience unless it's causally ordered. Right? That's the conclusion. It's not saying that the world itself is causally ordered. He thinks that you can't say whether the world is causally ordered or not. Like the world beyond our experiences, you can say almost nothing about, according to Kant. So he thinks he's deducing something, the transcendental argument, but it's not actually about the world, it's about the structure of our experience. And so, not all transcendental arguments accept that limitation. Some of them, like Strawson thinks he has a version of a transcendental argument. We don't need to keep talking about all the details of all of these, doesn't matter. But some people use transcendental arguments and they think that you can say something about the way the world is, something about our mental life first, then that's something about the way that the world outside our mental life has to be. So there are sort of more ambitious versions of transcendental arguments. And tag typically would be a more ambitious version. Right? It's not just saying something about the way our mind works, like a Kantian transcendental argument. It would be trying to say, we start off, my experience is intelligible, blah, 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 some premises in between, therefore God exists. And it's all about what's the premises in between that starting assumption, which everybody agrees, even the skeptic agrees, right? My experience is intelligible. And then you've got to say some premises, the hard bit. How do you connect that? You have to do something which motivates the thought that if
he just said what I said
about the world, say
he just talked about the distinction. I was like, I don't know.
I know. I mentioned it and you didn't say anything back.
I'm kind of like doing stuff. Sorry. Yeah, that's crazy.
You mentioned the conceptual versus real world. Yeah.
Say God's existence was true, then my mind couldn't be ordered in a sensible way. Like you've got to connect those two dots together. That's the really hard bit, and that's where all of the action is in tag. We can agree if you just say something like, "Unless God existed."
I think I might know where the disconnect is. Okay, so I thought the disconnect was they didn't understand that distinction, but clearly not. So here, I think I know what the disconnect is. So we start with metaphysical assumptions. That's a worldview. You start with a worldview right before you prove things, right? So we all have metaphysical assumptions. So where do the non-Christian metaphysical assumptions come from? Their opinion, right?
Yes.
Where do our metaphysical assumptions come from? Revealed by God in history, publicly accessible historical fact. So we're not starting in our mind. So like I don't know how to explain it. The way it's we all have a circular, we all bottom out in a circle, and their circle will like be like
it'll go back to their own mind,
their own opinion, their own mind. So
right, so that's the strength of the transcendental argument is you're going to point out that they're doing the same thing. They're also circular. Their ultimate authority is their mind.
Then let's look at our circle. So God's revelation grounds our reason, right? Then we use reason to investigate history, and then history identifies God's revelation. So it's a complete circle, you see? And we're appealing to something external. So we're starting in the world, right? They're starting with their mind detached from the world. We're starting with our mind connected to the world through God as the unifier, the connector.
Yeah.
Like if God designs my mind and God designs the world, then he can design them to connect. But then they want to say, well, they're not designed to connect. So they start with their mind disconnected. So it's the starting.
Yes, while relying on it.
Yeah. And
so
they can't think out the box. They can't think of starting with God. They can only think of because their whole life they've started with their own mind. They can't even I think it's hard for them to process starting their reasoning external to themselves, right? Proximately, of course, we start with ourselves, proximately. But in an ultimate sense, we would say God is ultimate. But they make their own mind ultimate. So they try to get a human finite mind to do what only a universal mind could do, basically.
Yeah. It becomes a little bit ironic too, because you can get there with them to point out the circularity, which is autonomous reasoning, that they imagine the things that they're claiming are real, although they haven't established a grounding for it. While they're trying to argue that you're imagining God. So it becomes a bit of irony if you can point that out to them.
If we look at this theologically too, it's just the sin of Adam, where they want to go, I'm God, I'm ultimate.
Well, that's right. This is not an intellectual problem, because, you know, these guys are not short on intellectual. It becomes a moral problem. They can't see what you're talking about. Like you're saying, they just can't see it or conceive of it, not because they're not intellectually capable. It's going to be a moral issue.
Experiences would be a big booming confusion. My experiences are not a big booming confusion, therefore God exists. Like that's the transcendental argument effectively, and it's just modus tollens.
What?
It's together. That's the really hard bit, and that's where all of the action is in tag. We can agree if you just say something like, unless God existed, my experiences would be a big booming confusion. My experiences are not a big booming confusion, therefore God exists.
Yeah, that would work, because how would they even refute that?
Maybe we have to convince them that we can defeat skepticism with our metaphysics. Maybe that's what they're skeptical of. But it's like they're not even in a position to be skeptical of that, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's so silly.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm pointing out. Like he's kind of pointing out like a flippant version of tag, which sort of hits the mark. And I'm wondering how they would even refute that. Like, oh, we have intelligible experience because of God.
Well, did he do the reductio though? He just did the. What did he do? I can't remember how.
Well, I mean, he just does it right here.
Really hard bit, and that's where all of the action is in tag. We can agree if you just say something like, unless God existed, my experiences would be a big booming confusion. My experiences are not a big booming confusion, therefore God exists. Like that's the transcendental argument of it.
Yeah, so he's not just right, exactly. So they have to. So it's like they have to admit that they can't defeat skepticism, and that if they don't think that's a problem, if they think, well, whatever, I just can't defeat skepticism. It's just we have to punt to I don't know. Well. What are we doing then? Why are we even arguing? So the debate would be a contradiction and be a performative contradiction.
Yeah. They want to bring their doubt to the Christian worldview and say, listen, take this on. And when you stand by your commitment and your argument, say, well, no, I have my argument. I have my reductio. I'm claiming the impossibility of the contrary. So go ahead and argue it. I see them as stuck there.
They don't want to be open about, because if you think about it, we're saying we know the truth revealed in history by God, and they're saying I don't know the truth. But think how that sounds, right?
It's like I don't know the truth, but I know you're wrong. Somehow. It's
like, yeah, I don't know the truth, but I know you don't I know you don't know the truth either. That's a contradiction. Yeah. If you don't know the truth, how do you know that I don't know the truth? But that's all they're saying, really.
I don't know. Really is. That really is it. That's it.
Modus tollens. You can state it like that. But then the premise is that the first one is the one we have to worry about. Right?
They say it,
is it true?
They say it in a way that sounds intellectual, but they're really just going, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's great, because that's what what we were just talking about there with I don't know anything for certain, but I'm sure you're wrong. Is really the backbone of it, and we'd like Peter.
That's a good rhetorical. I don't.
Yeah, Peter. This is like Peter points this out all the time on the screen. The ontology is it just is, the arbitrary, and the epistemology is we don't know, and then the morality is how I feel.
I'm not
basically is it.
I'm not certain, but I know you're not certain. Like what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild.
True that unless God existed, my experiences would just be a big booming confusion. Right? Why think that that's true? So we need to have some supporting argument to motivate that premise. But that's what I was hoping he would lay out. It's not very difficult. I mean, it's just a straightforward syllogism, two premises, right? One of them's a conditional, the other one's just a proposition. It's very straightforward, and you don't have to be a master logician or whatever. It's just clear, it's helpful. And I mean, so the other way of putting it, right, where you could make a distinction between these like modest or ambitious transcendental arguments, because the more modest way of putting tag would be something like, unless you believe that God exists, your experiences would be a big confusion, right? And that's, I think that premise is more plausible. I mean, and maybe that's right, but the problem with it is it doesn't follow from that God exists, right? Even if you grant that premise, the most that you'd get would be, so that if the premise was, unless I believe that God exists, my experience would be a big mess. My experience is not a big mess, therefore I believe that God exists, right? The conclusion would be a statement about what I believe. And, maybe that, that argument's, I think, slightly more easier to defend. Then the ambitious version of tag would be, unless God existed, my experience would be a big mess. My experience isn't a big mess, therefore God exists. And that's the ambitious one. And the conclusion of that is a statement about reality itself beyond my mind. Right? And I think that's the one that Jay wants to, but the first premises are so different, right? I think a lot of what he said related to an argument of the more modest type, right? Unless you have a belief that God...
Doesn't he take even a more ambitious type of argument where it's not if God exists or unless God exists, he's saying God is the necessary precondition for reality, the strongest form. Is that how you...
Yeah, I said performative. He's saying ambitious versus modest. Yeah, where Jay's making an ambitious tag is an ambitious argument or transcendental argument.
God exists, then your worldview is bound to be incoherent or something. And I mean, look, I think you could make a case that, so unless you think that you're a good person, you might find that your mental life is somewhat unlivable. It might drive you mad unless you think that you're a good person. I don't know, unless you think that that global warming is going to be fixed somehow or something. Like, I mean, you have these ideas, and if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to get out of bed anymore. You could just like collapse in a heap or something. Like, maybe that's true, that unless I have this sort of belief that gets me out of bed in the morning, I wouldn't be able to keep going, I wouldn't be able to live my life. That might be true. I think people have these kind of motivational beliefs that they need to entertain in order to get out of bed.
I've had callers
Exactly.
I've had callers to the show.
Like I make that exact argument. I'm like, dude, if I have no standard of truth, why would I even get out of bed? I wouldn't even know anything is true. Like, maybe I get out of bed and I die instantly. Like, I wouldn't know anything. I mean,
is Malpass trying to point out that, is he trying to insinuate that Jay is using an appeal to emotion on some level? That he's motivating view from need to...
I think he's saying, well, maybe we contradict ourselves by how we live, so what? I don't know. I'm not really sure the point he's making.
Yeah.
No, express exactly that. There was a woman that was, talking about, well, what gets you out of bed in the morning and these other things. I tried to touch on this point, and granted, I'm not as well versed, but in this case, we don't have Jay's actual argument. And I think you may be correct that there's a bit of an equivocation going on between the more modest versions and the more robust ones. Because I mentioned this notion that, or at least I recall mentioning this notion that it may be one thing you may need to believe that a God exists and serves as a grounding for logic in order to get rid of your discomfort with the possibility that either logic is grounded as you would like it, along those lines. What I was talking about, the main premise that there is some guarantor or grounded foundation for logic. This is where the transcendental arguments for the existence of God come in, because either they'll begin with either the logical absolutes or morality or some other puzzle that they think they can solve if and only if a God exists. And
how does Matt hold the idea of a logical absolute from his worldview? He just chunks that in there as though it's a thing.
They'll begin with either the logical absolutes or morality or some other puzzle that they think they can solve if and only if a God exists. And I never see that demonstration. So I kept asking, as Alex and I had talked about, can you put it, what's the first?
So the demonstration, I don't. It's not, demonstration is a weird way to think about it. So it's our we would say if you assume our metaphysics, then you wouldn't have a problem of induction or the problem of hard solipsism, because our metaphysics contain a unifier, absolute unifying principle that can connect our mind to the world and can connect past events to future events. So we have a metaphysical principle that gives an account for induction and solipsism, that they're not just arbitrary. So that's what I would say.
Right.
He wants to say, like, I don't know, that you have to demonstrate that. Well, the demonstration is the assumption. Assume it, and then what entails from the assumption. Don't assume it, and then you get a hard solipsism. That's the demonstration.
Yeah, that's one way of demonstrating it. The argument itself is a logical proof. You know, people ask for demonstration or proof. You're giving them a logical proof. If they were just to look at it on paper, you know, God is the necessary precondition for logic. We utilize logic in everything we do. Therefore, God. They say, okay, well, that is a deductive syllogism. I don't like it, but it is.
Well, the demonstration is this. It sounds simple, right? Maybe because it sounds so simple, they don't get it.
Yeah.
Demonstration is assume Christianity, assume Christian metaphysics, or assume Christianity is true. Assume the Bible's true. If the Bible's true, then we have a solution to, you know, insert whatever hard solipsism, problem of induction, whatever. I mean, there's several things you could put in there. We have a solution to induction. Assume it's not true. Therefore, you have no answer for induction, no answer for induction, no intelligibility. Something like that, right?
Yeah. That's a good, simple way. Now, if they look at that on paper and they didn't have an emotional bias, they would say, well, yeah, the first premise, even though I don't agree with it, it does give a reason prior to intelligibility. And the second one doesn't know. They would be able to see that in its simplicity, but they have an emotional bias here, right?
Bonson says the answer seems simple, like a Sunday school explanation, but he goes, but it doesn't matter if it's simple, because if I have a God that knows everything, how many hairs I have on my head, and if that God tells me that he's ordered the world in a way that the future resembles the past, which he does in the scripture, then I do have a reason, a metaphysical principle, and an epistemic justification for induction. So I do have, now you might not like the answer, but it is an answer. It counts in philosophy because it enables us to predict the future and account for how we predict it in that way, so that it counts as an explanation.
Yeah, right. And that's what's happening here is the transcendental argument works and they don't like it. They don't know how to get around it because they've assumed and overlooked transcendental categories their whole life. So without the emotional bias and the fact that they've put 10 or 20 years into atheism, if they just saw it on paper, they'd be like, well, yeah, actually that the first argument where God is the necessary precondition, it does give a reason. I don't like it.
There's a big analytic philosophy bias too, I feel.
The analytic versus the dialectic
versus continental philosophy. They're so analytic philosophy kind of poo-poos metaphysics, where continental philosophy takes it more seriously. So they're kind of dogmatically assuming analytic philosophy as well, right?
Yeah.
Premise. Where do we go from here so that we can maybe analyze it? But the other thing that kept nagging at me is, why do we just assume that it needs to have some grounding, that, you know, that it...
So if he's going to argue that it doesn't need grounding, that's going to be on him, right? He's going to have to tell us, well, we don't need to assume it.
Oh, well, I heard him say this when I was listening to you when I was running errands, where he says to Jay, what's the argument that logic needs to be grounded? So that's so confused, okay? What I think, so if logic isn't grounded, it's detached from reality. If it's not grounded, it's floating in thin air. So think about it this way. Logic in a basic sense is like necessary rules that tell us like necessary truths about the world.
A consistency tool. The concepts behind what's being.
I'm being very simple. I'm being very simple.
Well, I'm saying even more simply, logic doesn't apply to any sort of reason. It's consistency.
Well, think about for the purpose of like this explanation. So like he's like, what's the argument? It needs to be grounded, right? I'm trying to explain that. So if you think about it, they're rules of thought, right? They're rules that we follow, and it's like these necessary rules, if you follow them, you get to a necessary truth. That's deduction. So think about if the rules aren't grounded. So if the necessary rules are not real, then neither are the necessary truths. So if logic isn't grounded, the truths we get from it are detached from reality. So that's what we mean by grounded. You have to anchor it, attach it to the world, attach it to reality. And that's why Darth is always talking about the single concrete unifying principle. You have to unify the unifying principle. You have to connect logic to the world. So does that make sense? If logic is
so Matt Dillahunty, if he's going to say, well, I don't know if it doesn't need to be grounded, he's just disconnected himself from reality without realizing it. That could be pointed out.
If the rules aren't real, then neither are the truths that we get from logic. So neither the truths aren't real. So
yeah,
that logic could have been anything other than what it is. Assume that it needs to have some grounding, that that logic could have been anything other than what it is.
So that's just it just is answer, the arbitrary. Logic just is.
Well, yeah. But that's what they do. They're arbitrary all the time. They go, well, this could be true, this view, that view. They're always being arbitrary.
Right. So they get away with that for the most part. And when you come up against somebody,
calls them out on it. Yeah. Nobody calls them out on it.
Well, yeah, I think that's I think that's a really interesting question because it's such a difficult.
But check this out. It's frustrating. When we say we believe in the Bible is true, they go, "You're being arbitrary," right? Sure. But then we go, "Well, how are you not arbitrary?" And they go, "Why are you busting my balls for? Hey, I'm trying to debate here. We agree. Hey, It's like
yeah. You don't want to go over the tu quo que, but I understand that's not the actual argument.
Well, they say our belief in God is arbitrary, right? Basically, like they go fairy tale, sky daddy. They're saying that we're just arbitrarily saying this is true. But then they do the same thing with we go, well, how do you know the world is real as opposed to like a dream? Oh, we just presuppose it. Arbitrary. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about before. Get them to say it up front. Oh, so you're saying arbitrary foundations or conditions are not acceptable.
They're saying that these beliefs have like this privilege, like white privilege or something, that like you can't question the world is real or you can't question empiricism. They want to say these things, science, there's this epistemic privilege. And then we go, well, we say God has epistemic privilege. Well, you can't do that. Right? That's what they're doing. They're granting themselves epistemic privilege for their beliefs and then denying our epistemic privilege. Everyone has certain beliefs that have sort of like an epistemic privilege. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So theirs getting scot-free, and then we have to defend ours like tooth and nail. It's not fair at all.
Right.
Well, are logical truths themselves grounded by something else, or are they the ground floor itself that has no further support underneath it? But again, here there's two different ways of understanding that question. One of them is an epistemic question, and the other one is a metaphysical question. So you could ask yourself,
that's intentional.
My understanding.
It's intentionally because okay. For any claim, you're going to need both an epistemic reason and like a metaphysical principle to explain how the claim is possible, right?
Right.
So if you lack either one of those, it's going to be arbitrary. And in tag, we can flip between the two. They're interrelated, and like, so it's both. We can attack both. Darth likes to go metaphysical because he says go for the throat. Jay Dyer does the epistemic because Jay Dyer says, well, people can grasp the epistemic problems easier than the metaphysical issues. So,
well, yeah, the skeptic or the empiricist likes to break the categories apart when they're actually they're unified. If something is metaphysically true or objective, for you to speak about it, you're in the domain of epistemology to be able to know that. And then the other pillar, which gets avoided, is ethics. That's the one I like to go after. Like whatever you're bringing to the table, like you're ultimately saying, it's a subjective thrust to your argument. Like, well, this could be the right way. I don't really know. This could be the right information. I don't know how to handle it.
I've been bringing ethics up a lot because every time I'm talking to people, they try to like be the authority over me. You have to argue this way. Yeah, this is what counts as evidence because I say so, and all the. It's like, dude, you're making authoritative claims. I'm not making any claims.
Yeah, no, the ethic is great to point out. It seems to be avoided for the most part, or just not considered, but it's inescapable.
You know what a guy said to me today? What's an authoritative claim? Like, are you kidding me? It's when you're commanding me. Like, duh. What a dumb question.
Yeah.
Understanding of why this principle is true, the product of something else that I believe. Like, is it something that has a justification for it? Or is it somehow self-evident or something? Is it the ground level of my understanding? And then there's a separate question, which is it the case that the reality outside my mind, right, the truth itself about, say, logical principles, which is a hard thing to understand even what we mean by that, right? But is that truth itself dependent on some other truths, right? And the sort of tag explanation is that somehow there's a metaphysical account of this, right? Which is that the truth of something like the law of non-contradiction relies on the truth of something about God, and typically it's going to be something about. I think when I talked to Jay, he sort of very briefly and very summarily endorsed a divine conceptualist view, right? So what he's saying there is something like what a law of logic is in some way is a thought that God has in his mind, right? And if that ontology of what logic was true, then you couldn't have the law of non-contradiction or something unless God existed, because the law of non-contradiction in some way just is a thought that God's having, something like that. It's not quite clear exactly what that means, but that's the idea. So yeah, okay, if that's a metaphysical thing, that's got nothing to do with worldviews, right? If that was true, that would be true whether I was a Hindu or an atheist or whatever. I mean, it's not clear why I have to believe that that's true in order to have coherent experience, right? That's an epistemic question. It might, so the metaphysical question, is logic grounded in God? Pretty fucking hard question to know how to answer, but it's completely distinct from, do I have to believe that logic is grounded in God for me to understand logic or to make...
And then there's the ethical question. But see, he's got these compartmentalized.
Make sense out of it or something. So I think it's always helpful. And
this is kind of like the Dogmas of Empiricism, a paper by Quine, where they want to like say there's synthetic truths, which are truths about the world, like induction, and then there's analytic truths, which are like definitionally true, which is like deduction. So they want to say these things are like separate, but they're not.
Yeah, they're interrelated, right?
This is why the argument should be laid out clearly. Are we talking about the epistemic issue or are we talking about the metaphysical issue? They're completely separate. Anyway, I'll shut up. Epistemic issue or are we talking about the metaphysical issue? They're completely separate.
See, and they're completely separate, he says.
Maybe I could give the argument. Quine says, what does he say? I'm thinking of the myth of the given. What does Quine say? Can't remember what Quine says. Oh, now I remember. So he says that they want to say, like, one of the famous things you hear is like, okay, so a bachelor is an unmarried man, right? And it's like true, it's analytically true because that's just what it is. So you're saying
you don't have to know about things of the world to know that that's a truth by definition.
You're appealing to interchangeability. You're saying that you can just swap married man and bachelor and the meaning is the same. But you're just, what ends up I don't know, I'm not explaining this very well, but Quine argues that what ends up happening is they're smuggling in the necessity. The necessity is just assumed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of this is pointing out the smuggle, yes.
And tag, we're saying, well, we need to have a necessary truth. We need a necessary reality. So they're trying to have the necessary truth and deny the necessary reality. But if in reality nothing is necessary, then how could it be true that something is necessary? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll shut up.
I had an observation, and I was wondering if Matt caught it. I know Alex has remarked on it once before in connection with his discussions with Matt Slick, but there's a kind of idiomatic usage of the word transcendental, specifically transcendentals. Jay kept talking about transcendentals. He said it in your debate. He said it in his discussion with Alex some months ago. And this is kind of peculiar because I'm familiar with transcendental arguments of various forms, including tag. And among philosophers, they don't talk about transcendentals. A transcendental argument is a form of argument, but it's not called a transcendental argument because it deals with something called the transcendentals.
Transcendental categories?
But if you talk to Matt Slick, and I suspect Jay is getting
so
usage of...
I mean, you could use it in plural. So you could say the transcendental, and refer to like a worldview. The worldview is the transcendental. Or you could like break it down to like transcendentals. I mean, it could be both. You know what I mean? I don't know why he's being pedantic or something. I don't get it.
Yeah, I've heard Jay Dyer talk about transcendental categories: time, space, the self, meaning, value, purpose.
Yeah, but you could also refer to like all of them and call it the transcendental or something. Like he'll say God is the precondition for the preconditions. So God is the transcendental for the transcendentals. I don't know.
You say
the weird when you say it like that, but he would say God's the precondition for the preconditions, and the preconditions would be like the transcendentals, and God is the transcendental. I don't know if
you could say transcendental categories. I think it sounds a little bit.
That's what Kant would say. Yeah, I don't know why he's making a big deal out of this.
The expression transcendentals from Matt Slick, or from others who picked it up from Matt Slick. But he seems to think that there's this category of features of reality, things like numbers, things like logic, the possibility of truth and knowledge and values. He thinks that these things are transcendental. They are transcendental objects. They're not empirical objects, right? They're not objects to be met with in space, right? These are features or facts about reality that are transcendent as he sees them. So in his ontology, they transcend the time and space, the physical, and so they are the transcendentals, and that's why you keep hearing them talk about the transcendentals. But I thought that was a kind of a peculiar thing to hear from someone who isn't Matt Slick, or obviously a devotee of Matt Slick's version of tag. And I was wondering if anyone else had noticed that as well. I think Alex had, but Matt, did you sort of pick up on that? Did you notice it?
So not to the extent that you did. When I heard, for whatever reason, and perhaps because I'm a self-educated dilettante in this area, every time he would say transcendentals, my brain would just interpret that because he's talking about essentially an item that is transcendental. I just assumed he was talking about an abstract concept and an abstraction or something, rather than I never would have presumed that he was either talking about a collection of transcendental arguments, or that the things he was pointing to as transcendental were were why the argument was transcendental. I thought it was maybe one of those things where I would have used the word abstract to describe something. Although we clearly have, Jay and I, some fundamental disagreements on some linguistic components, not the least of which was the number of times that I was accused of coming up with something that was arbitrary after I'd talked about either I presuppose this, which still isn't arbitrary. There are reasons why I presuppose it, and perhaps there's a transcendental argument that could be used to explain why I might presuppose something that, which would be the modest version that Alex was talking about, I suppose, where I need to believe this in order to not have my world descend into chaos. So when I was talking to him about these,
but that doesn't mean it's true. If that doesn't really get you to truth, that just says like it's conceptually true, but that doesn't mean it's true in reality. So it doesn't. To me, that doesn't do anything. We're still in la la land.
Yeah.
I kept going back to like the debate with Cy more than the debate with Matt, because while I don't necessarily put any of them in the exact same bubble, I remember Cy talking about this notion of circularity, whether there's something that's viciously circular or virtuously circular. And I'd always been of the perspective that, now you're just playing games with words because your argument's either circular or it's not. And so for me, when I look at even Jay's almost version of an argument, there's this notion that I was not convinced that there'd been any demonstration that the laws of logic, which I'll just go with that label since that's what they're going to call it all the time, have or need a foundation. But I thought of something after the debate, which I know I thought of previously, just not during, which is it's not just, I'm not saying these things don't need a foundation. I'm saying where's the demonstration that they do? Because I don't see a demonstration that they couldn't either just be the foundation or, not require any external justification or warrant, or.
How would logic just be a foundation? A tool of consistency is a foundation.
They don't seem to understand the issue of like if something's purely abstract and not connected to the world, then it's not going to be able to you can't use it to tell you about the world, tell you truths about the world.
But they're going to do it anyway.
His view, which is that there's almost like a linear causal type foundation where God serves as the grounding for logic, which serves as the grounding for math and blah, 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 blah. But it occurred to me that there's at least a third option that neither one of us really discussed, and that, and this may get to a question that Ozzy asked me the other day about properly basic beliefs. And that is that it could be a like almost linear causality foundation chain. It could be the basement foundation, or it could be something closer to like the fire triangle, where you have multiple independent components that must that cooperate in order to result in fire.
This is the problem.
And so,
remember, this view, that view, could be this, could be that. Never make a commitment. So they live their whole lives with no commitment. They're committed to the church of I don't know. Their commitment is I don't know. That is nothing.
Yeah. So they want to break down Jay Dyer with their doubt. And he's like, no, I'm not accepting your doubt. Here's my argument. You can keep your doubt. Your non-committal doubt.
Properly basic beliefs is something like Plantinga brought up, and that's a foundationalism. But that foundationalism has been eviscerated. So that's why he can just do, well, I could have this as my properly basic belief, or that, or this, or this. It's like worldview buffet.
Yeah, this is Matt coping with his debate with Jay Dyer. Like, I need to get a worldview in order to have a debate with this type of person.
We'll get to presupposition in a minute, I'm sure. But when I've been asked a couple times about properly basic beliefs, and my view on them has generally been, when someone says it's properly basic, they're not asserting that it. Well, they seem to be asserting that it does not have nor need a foundation, rather than and that it is warranted. Like, you can trust this even though we have no foundation for it. You know, you can trust your senses are properly basic according to some. And I would argue, no, your senses aren't properly basic. As a matter of fact, we know that they're unreliable. We can test they're unreliable. We've come up with methods for independent verification. And hey, do you see what I see? And looking at things from different angles. We know about optical illusions. We know that our mind is going to do things to all this. So we know they're unreliable. I don't know how you could call them properly basic, just saying that they're warranted. And it seems to me to be a way to hide an uncomfortable assumption, or perhaps a circular argument there. Because if the argument,
the point of transcendental argument is that you can't deny the reliability of your senses, because then now everything collapses. So I don't know, Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, he's making these universal assumptions too about everyone's senses, isn't he?
That they're unreliable.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good, but how is he making such an assumption from a skeptical worldview?
Like, I don't know what he's saying. Unreliable. Reliable doesn't mean 100%, right? Is he just saying they're not 100%?
Probably.
Actually, I'm probably interpreting. I think he's using words wrong. I'm going to be charitable, but I'll say this: Matt Dillahunty is properly basic.
argument is that transcendental grounding, in the church, that this wow, I almost went to the same transcendental that you were talking about a minute ago, that the foundations of logic need a grounding, and therefore we give them a grounding that we can't demonstrate, which that grounding doesn't need a grounding.
This is going to fail when you take the "it just is" with logic.
This is super dumb. The ground. What's the ground of the ground? What's the Supreme Court of the Supreme Court? What's the president of President Trump? You know, it's like that's the ground. The point of the ground. It's the terminus of the chain of justification.
Yeah, when he takes the route of logic just is, doesn't that open the way for God just is, which is prior to logic, a defeater, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You can point out the defeater, say that's not my argument, but it is a defeater for what you're trying to do.
Of course, they're hypocrites, right? Of course.
Well, I mean, it's not a bad thing to point out. Say it's not even my argument, but you're already introducing a defeater here.
It's basically God is the basement floor. We've gone a step further, and so the argument then becomes: these things need a grounding or a foundation, which does.
So you'd ask Matt, "Oh, can you demonstrate why they don't need a grounding?"
It's so funny. Do you know what it? If they don't have a grounding, guess what? They're arbitrary. Grounding just means not arbitrary.
Yeah.
Opposite of arbitrary. So he's saying, I can just be arbitrary, but I don't think he knows what these words mean.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what he's doing with it just is. If he can be arbitrary, we say, well, we can be arbitrary, and God is prior to all these arbitrary claims.
Is this what they're really arguing? Like, I just want to be arbitrary? Is this Malpass?
They don't realize what's pointed out. Yeah.
They take I want to be arbitrary, and then they dress it up in a bunch of like science.
Right. Right. It's all about the dressing. Yeah.
Does not require a foundation, which leads to, I think that's something circular, because it's not about now whether or not it kind of gets to this issue of certainty, because we could look at it and say these laws of logic are reasonably warranted, the things that are argued in the debate, and they're just saying no, it needs to be absolute and concrete, and say these laws of logic are reasonably warranted.
But right there, though, see how that's just like dressing up arbitrariness? They're reasonably warranted. Like,
yeah,
what is
exactly. But it's when you boil it down, it's necessary, optional. Necessary, optional. You can't have. They want to have this middle ground or something.
Neutral ground.
They're like fake necessary.
the things that are argued in the debate. And they're just saying, no, it needs to be absolute and concrete. And there's exactly one thing in my brain that might be able to do that. And that is a perfect God that doesn't have a foundation.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things about properly basic beliefs. First of all, I mean, that's a controversial concept in epistemology. It's something that I am partial to. I believe in the notion of properly basic beliefs. That is, I believe there are beliefs that are basic. So we've all got beliefs that are sort of basic to our worldview, right? But properly basic beliefs are supposed to be special. They're supposed to be different. But it isn't because they're certain. It isn't because they're indubitable. It isn't because you can't be wrong about them or anything like that. I have on my channel some videos about this, and I list 5 criteria for proper basicality, what distinguishes basic beliefs from properly basic beliefs. And there's a number of criteria, but among them is
there's a multiple. Pick one. Hey, have one. This one, that one. We'll just switch in the middle of the debate. I'll have 5 of them. I'll argue 5 of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of these guys get off on being able to do that. They're like, oh, I can bring in all these different perspectives and confuse and get you to think about all these different things. But when you ask their actual position, they're like, well, I don't really know.
I mean, he just conceded his criteria is arbitrary. He goes, there could be any there's several. But that's like, but what is he saying really? He's saying it's arbitrary.
Yeah, that's
they're addressing. They won't say that outright. They'll do this like fake, like, isn't it sound? Don't I sound smart when I say it? Frame it like,
yeah. I like the way you're seeing that, because you start to see that, and then it becomes ever present in these guys, and you just have to keep pointing it out. But we talked about this prior. Like, you want to get them to bring that out up front. Like, okay, so we're not going to be arbitrary, or like you said, do you have a non-arbitrary reason that you're going to bring to the table tonight? Stuff like that.
And before you debate, make them commit to non-arbitrary knowledge, and then they're done.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're referring back to how they're, violating the initial target.
Optically, too, what are they going to do? Well, no, I'm going to make arbitrary arguments. Well, I'm not.
Well, that's true, because they say, no, it's not arbitrary. Give a reason. And you have to point out how the reason is arbitrary. It traces back to arbitrariness as well.
So they'll need an epistemic reason and a metaphysical principle reason. So
yeah, and then you can always go into, to finish it off, like, and then you're going to also need to provide why I ought to consider this, why one should follow such a system.
Be properly basic. It has to somehow be ingredient in rationality itself. It sort of has to be at the very root of what would ground what we call.
It sort of has to be, I guess.
It's the killer if someone argues moral anti-realism. They just, every time I go, should I believe your argument?
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying you should. I'm just talking to you.
They have to say that, and then how stupid does that sound? Well, I'm saying an argument, but you don't have to believe my argument. Like, what is it? Why are you? Doesn't that sound goofy?
It does, and it's great to bring that out, because that's essentially what's happening in all these discussions. Is when you go to the meta ethic, they go, "Oh no, I'm not saying you should do anything." And some people will outright say that. No, I'm not saying you should take me seriously. I've clicked somebody out of the stream when they said that. Just effect, like, oh, okay, click.
So if the form is correct and the premises are true, you're saying I ought to believe the conclusion.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's where ethics shine. Absolutely.
Call rationality, and that if you don't believe certain things, then you're not going to be engaged in anything that we would recognize or call rational. But I don't want to. I don't know if we want to burn a lot of oxygen on this, because I think Jay said in his discussion with you, Matt, that he disavows the notion of proper basicality. I mean, he said it just sort of. It was
the one point that we appeared to agree on, which is now why I question my position even more than I did.
Okay. Well,
that's good though, right? He's admitting that he's questioning his own position. That's the idea.
Maybe at some other juncture, you and I can talk about it, and I can expound upon my views.
I'm going to stick with the debate stuff, but I want to make sure I touch on that. And I'd love to sit down and have you correct me and inform me more on properly basic beliefs.
What's that?
More like, sit down and have you gaslight me. More like, right?
He's going to stick with the debate stuff, even though he's questioning his own position as well.
I think Jay espoused a version of coherentism, so not a foundationalist view.
No, it's not coherentism, but it's similar in the fact that it's a unified system.
I mean, I think you could lump coherentism with foundationalism. I don't think they're that.
Yeah, neither of them are going to be Jay's position, but there's going to be similarities that they might point out.
Coherentism is like foundationalism, but instead of like one solid truth, you like have a web of beliefs.
Yeah.
But still like, so we would actually be foundationalists, but we would, as opposed to, this is where I bring up the like revealed in history. So it's not a brute assertion, it's a revealed assertion. But we are foundationalists as Christians, but we would say we don't. It's different because it's not a brute foundation; it's a revealed foundation.
Yeah, so it's aside from the traditional use of foundationalist philosophy.
Yeah, it's not the same. Yeah, it's not the
same. So he doesn't think that a coherentist isn't going to say that chains of justification go back to points where they terminate. More what you've got is a web of belief. And I mean, I'm quite inclined to, I enjoy thinking about that type of view more than foundationalist view for various reasons. Jay introduced a distinction that I don't recognize, which was between something like, well, I'm not sure whether this is what sometimes he means by presupposition or transcendentals, where it was something like the types of things that if you tried to not believe them, it would destroy your worldview or something, right? And I just don't recognize this category as a genuine category for a couple of reasons. First of all, it feels like, I just don't know what it means to say that it destroys your worldview. I just don't know what that means as a concept.
Like if you refused the law of non-contradiction, is that what he's getting at?
Who's the authority? I don't know what that means. I don't accept that.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, is that what he's touching on? Like he doesn't think there's things that can just destroy your worldview if you refuse them?
Yeah, he wants to like deflate metaphysics. But they don't deflate their language.
Rethink my worldview, like completely like keel over in a quivering wreck on the floor. I mean, what are we talking about? What does it actually mean to say that it destroys your worldview? It destroys your worldview in Jay's opinion, right? Or what are we talking about here? But secondly, it feels...
I think that's another thing too. It's like, I think a lot of these guys don't think they can actually be defeated for some reason. There's no way a Christian could...
See, that's only his opinion. That's not my opinion. And my opinion is what really matters.
Yeah, because they base it all on the opinion. They're like, well, ultimately, no matter what anybody says to me, it's just their opinion. Like they're resting on that, and then they're trying to argue that their opinion is going to disprove your worldview. So just bringing in doubt, basically, and say, will you accept my doubt? And you just say, no, I don't accept your doubt. Here's why. And they're kind of stuck. Like these guys are kind of stuck. They don't like Jay Dyer's worldview, but they don't really know what to do about it.
Feels like I can imagine some precisifications of that term where it's natural to think that it's relative to a person. So, for instance, and he gave this example of someone. He said, "What if I thought someone lived next door to me, but I figure out it's not actually them or something." Right? Someone, I can't even remember who it was. Anyway, someone, like some famous person.
Lil Wayne.
I imagine I thought that Ozzy lived next door to me, right? And then I go up to speak to them one day and I realize, oh crap, this isn't Ozzy. I thought for ages I thought Ozzy lived next door to me, but it's someone completely.
It was Lil Wayne. He forgot, but it's not that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's pointing out the devastation of like a fundamental category versus a category that's just normative, right?
So right, because logic is what we use to logic is like a tool we use to decide what's true or discover truth. So if the very tool for truth is broken, then every truth claim breaks. Whereas opposed to like, if I'm wrong about who my neighbor is, that doesn't destroy all truth.
Right.
Completely different. Actually, embarrassing. Something like that happened to me the other day. I mistook my neighbor for someone else. It's quite embarrassing. Anyway, but the point is, you can imagine a situation like this where maybe you had built up some massive narrative about this in your head about this person, and you thought that you lived next to them and it was really important to you, and you thought that, you know, when you were seeing them talking with people and whatever, gardening and stuff, that you were getting that you were seeing something really significant. You were tweeting about it. Oh yeah, I live next door to, you know, Prince Charles or something, and he's like growing cucumbers right now. But when people like think, oh really, that's amazing how you get this access to this thing, and then one day you realize, oh shit, that's not Prince Charles, that's just like a normal dude. And maybe it could destroy, I mean, I guess it destroy your worldview. Maybe that could be the beginning of like a psychological episode where you realize, oh, I'm such an idiot, I've made such a big fool of myself, blah blah blah. I don't know if that's what it means, but like,
don't you think that's a lot of it too? These guys have spent like decades and decades of mocking Christianity, promoting atheism. Like when they get challenged on this level, like how devastating that is. They have to go back in their mind and think of all the material that they've created.
Not with Malpass. Malpass said he grew up atheist. So I think Malpass has no animosity towards Christianity. I think Malpass is just the result of academia. And like postmodernism.
Sure, Matt Dillahunty would be a better example of what I'm speaking of. Like if he actually like had to the consideration in his own solitude, in his own time, said, "Damn, I see what he's saying." Like that would be so devastating because he has to, you know, now like deal with his past.
Yeah. So Dillahunty was a true believer in the Bible at one point.
His parents were strong into it. Yeah.
So what I read a book on propaganda, the formation of men's attitudes by Jacques Ellul, and he says basically like, let's say you're a hardcore Democrat, and then you decide, oh, the Democrat Party sucks, I'm going to be a Republican. It's like you develop that, you become like you develop like a zeal because when you switch sides, you develop a zeal for your previous side, he says in that book. There's some psychological reason for that.
A zeal? Yeah, a zeal for your...
you feel like they lied to you or you were like wronged. You know what I
mean? Right. So there's so many barriers here. Like that's what I'm saying. I think you can merge this. Yeah.
The guy who switched side is going to be like a warrior, like go militant against like Democrats. Whereas like if you're a lifelong Republican, you're not that militant. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So like Malpass, for instance, could come to the conclusion at some point, like, yeah, I can't really overcome this and say that outright. Where Matt, if he was at that point, he would have to go against all his militant and ridicule of Christianity for a couple decades, which would be very painful. Like that would be the difference in discovery, because the sort of the damaging nature of figuring out you're wrong about something very fundamental. Like most people have experienced that on some level, but in these scenario, like a scenario like Matt Dillahunty, like not only would it be devastating that he's wrong, but he has like decades of mockery that he was incorrect about. So it becomes a mirror in a sense, right? Like now the mocking is reflected back to him.
He has a trauma that like Malpass never has. So,
but do you see what I'm saying about like the devastation, like to getting to the truth of the matter? Like he has to.
Yeah,
there's an emotional barrier set up there.
There's a financial barrier too, right?
Yes, right. That's what I'm getting at. Like a financial, notoriety, an emotional barrier. All these things are propped up against realizing this, which goes into the fall of Adam. Like it's a moral.
And then it gets into like it gets even real. Like I have people that P. Mars, I thought you were smart until you told me you don't believe in evolution. So there's just pressure that the external world puts on us to like think like the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
But like,
do you believe in evolution?
Dependent.
No, I mean I reject evolution.
Okay, I don't. All right.
I mean, how would that, if death started in the garden, how does evolution work with a Christian worldview?
I mean, it's like, I agree. Yeah, I think it's bad because then there's no atonement for like sin. Death and suffering don't enter the world through sin, so the atonement doesn't make sense. But yeah, I wouldn't like hate you if you believe in evolution, or I wouldn't like.
Yeah, John, it's just not something I typically get into arguments about. I'll argue how it's mostly philosophy sold as a science, stuff like that.
Me either. I'm not really into the science debates because they're kind of inconclusive. What I like about tag is we actually can like completely demolish any opposition.
Right. But if you listen to Bonson's take on evolution, it's helpful because you can point out how they're just holding a philosophy dogmatically that's being sold as a science, which is propaganda in the education system.
Yeah, we can point data points that contradict their narrative and all that. Like it becomes like well, this piece of data contradicts your narrative. Well, this piece of data contradicts your narrative. So that's why I like tag. It gets to like, well, whose narrative's true, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it would be useful, but I'm not really
into the science. I'm not really a science person, but a lot of people are like that stuff.
Yeah,
I'm more into all of that narrative and stuff going on in the first place. And there's nothing about the belief in particular that distinguishes it from anything. It's completely mundane belief about like the identity. But like that is totally dependent. Blah blah blah. I don't know if that's what it means. But like
anymore, yeah.
But like that is totally dependent on all of that narrative and stuff going on in the first place. And there's nothing about the belief in particular that distinguishes it from anything. It's completely mundane belief about like the identity of your neighbour. It's in fact the example that Jay used to distinguish the special kind of belief from this humdrum thing about mistaking your neighbour. I mean, that could have a significant impact on my worldview. I might have to reevaluate lots of things that I think. Whereas he thinks believing in something like a transcendental, like a law of logic or something, if you doubt that, then there's this like catastrophic consequence that is to follow. But doubting who your neighbour is doesn't have any catastrophic consequence. I mean, not only do I think that's wrong because you could have a catastrophic consequence, whatever that's supposed to be, by mistaking your neighbour, but secondly, it's not catastrophic to doubt almost anything of these. You know, there are Buddhists who regularly will talk about how the self is an illusion. It's a belief they've come to internalize, right? That the self is an illusion. David Hume even has a similar sort of idea. And it's not worldview ending. It might be worldview changing to have that. It might be very different from the way that Jay sees it. Also,
it would be when you try to work out that you're an illusion, thinking in illusions, professing in illusions.
Your rationality is an illusion. Your argument's an illusion.
Yeah, it would be damaging, I would say in a good way, to snap out of that. Like everything would and should change if you see the folly in that. So I don't.
He doesn't care about performative contradictions. It's like he doesn't care about the contradiction. That's
you want to get to the root of Alex Malpass. Like, why are you claiming this is true? Like, what are you basing this whole speech on? Like, basically, he's trying to play neutral territory overall, and he's completely arbitrary. So he's like, none of this can be damaging because.
Well, this is like pluralism. He's saying like these are things he doesn't even believe. Like, you know what I mean?
We want to know what he believes in order to say the things about what he believes and doesn't believe, and which one is right or good. He is all these things, right? Like embedded into what he's saying right now.
Anything can be true except for an exclusive truth.
Yeah.
We have to believe anything, but we exclude the exclusive truths.
which is an exclusive truth claim.
Contradiction, exactly.
Questioning laws of logic. I mean, Aristotle himself very famously has an argument that the law of excluded middle isn't true, right? It's in this book called On Interpretation, like chapter 9, right? It's called the sea battle argument. I mean, are we saying that Aristotle didn't have what did he destroy his own worldview or something? I mean, like, it is possible, and evidently so, that philosophers will question almost all of the things that Jay brought up as being transcendentals, the self, the past, induction, laws of logic, whatever these things are, that I just don't accept that to question them does anything particularly significant to your worldview. You just might have to rethink some stuff and kind of come to terms with it or whatever. But sufficiently ingenious philosophers have come to terms with lots of very difficult to understand things. I mean, they just don't recognize it as marking a distinction of any real significance at all.
Yeah, can I just jump in and sort of come to Jay's defense here? I think, I mean, I don't think, my suspicion is he doesn't think that that it causes, and that doubting any of these things or not being able to defend any of these things causes anybody any particular psychological distress or some kind of conflict in their overall cognitive economy.
Thank you. Oh my God. For real. Like, holy shit. Like, Malpass is like, these people don't have a midlife crisis, therefore.
No, but the funny thing is that would apply to Matt, as we were suggesting earlier, financially, emotionally. This devastation would particularly apply to Matt.
Really, people have inconsistent worldviews. In fact, I think everybody does. I think everyone has an incomplete worldview, and everyone has an incomplete.
I mean, it's not that doesn't sound right, but it's interesting when you ask people from their worldview how they got to that conclusion, right?
No, I would agree with that. No worldview is exhaustive. Jay Dyer would say that.
But how does Ozzy justify that? Is what I'm getting at. Those are one of the things.
Sure. Yeah. But like, to be charitable, he is correct on that. Like, no worldview is exhaustive. There's some things. Like, as Christians, there's like some things where, like, why did God do this? Well, God didn't reveal the answer, so I don't know, right?
Yeah, but from his perspective and his worldview, isn't it an interesting question to ask how he got there?
Well, that's why we would say, like, okay, yeah, Christian, our worldview isn't exhaustive, but at least we can account for truth, reason, intelligibility, logic, science.
There's so many universal claims that go unpointed out from secularists, like, oh, we know that all people this, or no one can do this, universal negative. When you simply say, like, how did you come to that conclusion? Through observation and sense data. Science certainly didn't give you that answer.
Well, once again, he's going, I'm not certain, but I'm certain you're not certain.
Yeah, there it is.
Consistent worldview, and to suggest that Christianity or Islam or whatever is a complete and internally consistent and coherent worldview is, I think, symptomatic of a person that has not examined their beliefs very, very thoroughly. I think everyone has an incomplete and inconsistent belief set. So I don't think I don't think that that's what he's trying to get at there. I think what he's trying to say is that if you have no way of grounding or rationally defending some of the commitments that we all have, like we're all committed to the idea that we have a self, or we're committed to the idea that there's a mind-independent reality, that there exist other minds, that there's such a thing as truth, that causality exists, that time and space exist, that the world is intelligible, that logic is validity preserving, and so forth.
He just conceded he believes those things arbitrarily. So if you believe all those things for no reason, why are you going to bust my balls for believing in God for what you consider to be no reason?
Right, he can't do it. So if he could see that, or perhaps he does see it and is being honest, he'd be like, there's really not need for you to debate, Matt. Like, especially those type of people, because you're going to fall short there. Which, interestingly enough, I think that's what Matt does now. If someone starts challenging his presuppositions, he'll give the call to somebody else. He'll avoid it, like you pointed out earlier with Malpass. Just don't answer them.
That the future will resemble the past. All of these things are commitments that we have. We are literally committed to these things, day by day, minute by minute. We exhibit in our action, in our every action and every word, our commitment to this.
Hence performative contradiction. You literally can't do anything without God. It's crazy. It's so obvious. That's why God says to Lazarus, I could resurrect you from the dead, and they would still not believe.
Yeah. I think it's about seizing these moments in argumentation with your interlocutor, like you're doing now when you're, observing it and critiquing it. Like, when you're able to do that at the particular moment with your interlocutor is going to be key, but it's very difficult, in a live discussion and debate. But I think that's the idea.
I have no way of making sense of these things, no way to ground them, as you might put it, then your worldview will come tumbling down in the sense that it is incoherent. Once pointed out to you, you will realize I have no reason to believe any of these faith commitments. All the degree to which I have these commitments, that I'm invested in these things, I'm being irrational to exactly that degree because I have no way of making sense of them. So I think it's in that sense. And that doesn't necessarily have to elicit any particular crisis in a person.
Yeah. He explained it fairly well there, like what's happening. The conclusions are funny though. Like, oh, it doesn't mean anything though.
What I'm saying, man, they can't think outside the box. It's like they're so close, but they just can't get outside their box.
Person, you'd really have to. I don't know how.
It's more of becoming aware that you're.
And what you say, like Matt would say, like, well, how did you deal with that? It sounds like you understand it, Ozzy. How do you deal with the fact that you're just faithfully believing in all these preconditions all your life, arguing with people against God, having no idea, no actual argument why he doesn't exist? How do you deal with this? Like,
you know what I've been saying to them? I'm like, you literally live in the shadow of theism, of Christianity. You live in the shadow of Jesus. Like, think about that.
That's a pretty nice way to put it. It's a basic borrow from the Christian worldview, framed a different way, but that sounds good.
Your worldview is not as coherent and confidence inspired as perhaps.
And it's not as coherent. It's the justification is not there at all. The coherency is lacking. Well, confidence inspiring. I mean, come on.
The thing is, their worldview is coherent by its own standards, but the problem is the standards are arbitrary. So coherence isn't the issue. It's like the Bonson says, when it comes to worldviews, unity is the name of the game. It's about giving an account for unity.
Yeah. We don't say, because a lot of unbelievers get mixed up in this. Like, you're saying I can't know anything. That's crazy. Like, no, I think you know things. You can't account for the things that you do know, right? Like this, they miss this a lot. Like, oh, it was like even him and Stein or Tabash. He said, oh, you're wrong about this. Like, you said I can't balance my checkbook without God, and I do balance my checkbook.
But basically, this is how they know things. They'll go, all defined knowledge this is the definition of knowledge. Well, I meet my criteria for knowledge, therefore I know things. That's what they're doing, right? They have no objective reference point to ground anything in an objective sense.
So then Matt comes along and says, I don't even know if we need to ground things, right? So what happens when they take that route?
Perhaps I thought it should be.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine some people would be. In fact, I can think of a particular person or two who I think if you told them, listen, you have these faith commitments and they are not grounded in the way that you think they are, and if you were able to demonstrate that to them, they would have a real kind of psychological crisis.
It was why early in the debate,
these other people, not us.
Is this funny? They're talking about midlife crisis. He's like, oh, I didn't have a midlife crisis, so my worldview is coherent.
Yeah, I that didn't happen to me, so I must be all right.
So I'm happy to acknowledge that I, like everybody else, have some presuppositions. I think that and he kept saying, "Oh, this is just arbitrary." Well, I could have decided arbitrarily that death is preferable to life as a principle, and this would result in, well, if everybody did it, the extinction of the species.
Exactly.
But
on his worldview, you could decide it,
dude,
in any manner, and it would have the same weight or thrust.
Bro, they say suffering is bad. Suffering is bad. Well, how do we get rid of suffering? Get rid of life. Get rid of life. Logic.
That's an answer that they don't like. I mean, that works with the vegans too. Animal suffering, same type of argument there. Yeah, they can't refute that.
That's an arbitrary presupposition.
This is the way to deal with fools. You answer a fool by his folly. You assume what he's saying and show the extreme.
Yes.
So suffering's bad. Okay, well, this is the extreme. Get rid of all life, no
right.
life, no suffering. So
sort of the internal critique is answering him according to his folly, and then you don't give him grants.
But you don't answer a fool to his folly because you don't let them dogmatically force their view on you.
Or grant themselves and smuggle things in that they can't account for. So Proverbs 26, 4 and 5 are absolutely key in what we're doing here.
That we can show either through intellectual exercise or terrifyingly through practice that it leads to something that is clearly not the case. And so instead, if I pick a different arbitrary foundation, and I did this for moral grounding, that life is generally preferable to death, that obviously has much more use because it doesn't have the...
So he just shifts over to utility, right?
You said obviously. It's just... So obviously is doing obviously a lot of work there.
Right. It's just a persuasive language.
Well, we all know this is true. Well, everyone agrees. Well, obviously, we all see.
Right. Rhetoric.
That result in, well, if everybody did it, the extinction of the species. But that's an arbitrary presupposition.
Right? No one would do that.
Yeah, the little subtleties, yeah.
That we can show either through intellectual exercise or terrifyingly.
Also the strength of we, right? We can show, we've discovered. There's that as well.
We all know. We know now because...
Well, we now know, yes.
We now know because...
Me and this team of people in my garage that you can't see from here, they're specialists. We all know.
We're not cavemen anymore, clearly. Therefore...
But the we, right? Like the we is the strengthening component of like, oh, it's not just me.
Yeah, it's just all superficial. It's all optics.
Optics.
Like through practice, that it leads to something that is clearly not the case. And so instead, if I pick a different arbitrary foundation, and I did this for moral grounding, that life is generally preferable to death, that...
Well, he's saying he did this like as though it's a thought experiment or exercise. This is his actual worldview, is it not?
It blows my mind. Like, let's say I am arbitrary. Like, what do you...
Yeah, he's kind of saying something like he did an experiment here about like trying different presuppositions, but his actual whatever his moral framework is going to be arbitrary. It needs an agreement from others. That's the way it functions. What he calls an objective moral is an agreement that's built on subjectivity.
Obviously has much more use because it doesn't have the
there's utility smuggled in, right?
Consequences of a death cult, and also by including gender.
Did he stop believing in God when he started losing his hairline?
Goodness, I don't know. Could have been a multitude of factors. I mean, it'd be an interesting question.
I'm just joking, but he's gay. That's another issue.
Well, no, but the funny thing about that is he's in like a strange gay denial, right? He has like a tranny husband.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I truth is important to me. You can't tell me that my penis wielding husband is not a woman, but truth is important to me. It's like, wait.
It's like when your desires conflict with the book, it's like, well, no wonder you reject it, kind of,
Yeah, if you take that route of argumentation, though, it's going to be, again, it's going to teeter on ad hominem.
Right.
But there is something to be said there, like somebody who's gone down the road of like hedonism, like drug use, like sexual depravity. Like,
I want to make that my main.
You just write them. Hold on a sec. You can't just write them off flat out. Like, oh, he's just this. But you can make a case that like that lifestyle can carry over into how they think about the world, obviously. Go ahead.
Yeah, my bad. Sorry for interrupting.
Sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't make that your main argument, but it's like
kind of right
a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of a sidebar if you want to use it. You can lose a lot of audience using things like that too, but it's at your discretion. I think, for instance, I think Darth loses a lot of audience from other Christians because of the way he navigates the conversation. You know, I could be wrong. Like you pointed out, all's playing out like Tom Rabbit's videos that are supposed to be obviously Darth getting crushed are now like being reviewed again. Like, wow, these guys have nothing. So,
but I think like, I don't know, Christ lost audience by being kind of like honest. And I think sticking to the Bible and, you know, trying to really obey what God says, it's not popular. And that's just kind of true.
That's right. But the thing about it too, though, is Christ keeps composure, except when he's in the temple flipping tables, which becomes a distinct example. But if he lost composure more often, that distinct example would lose lose credibility. You know what I mean?
Lost composure there.
What's that?
I wouldn't say he lost composure.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if he lost composure in different circumstances in the Gospels that we could note, it might give way to potentially assuming that, you know, this is an emotional factor involved here.
He would use hard language. Like I think of John chapter 6, towards the end of chapter, he had like this huge crowd was gathered listening to him. And he used very hard language that was very offensive. And like people left, right? And they're mad. And the disciples were even like, Jesus, what are you doing? You know, like you're turning people away. And Jesus he goes, did I offend you to them? That's what Jesus said to them. It's John 6:61. So I don't know, man. Like I don't really worry about numbers or like how many people. I just think about like I just want to give God glory and like stay true to his word. And that's like my main focus, I guess. I'm not worried about like are people I know that most people are gonna reject the message and make fun of me and mockers and scoffers. So I expect to be persecuted for saying the truth. But I still say the truth, and like I give everyone a chance. I might say, you know, I'm done talking to you for today, but the next day I'll give them another chance. You know.
Well, you mentioned earlier about the using the extremes to point out ideas, like in philosophy in general. Like you take someone's worldview and you take it to the extreme to point out the absurdity of it. So when you apply that to how you're handling unbelievers and different interlocutors of unbelief, you could take that to the extreme and say, what if I acted like a total jerk in every case, just insulted them, ridiculed them, versus if I acted charitable in every case and meek. Like if you put that idea out there, you can see. I would argue that the meekness, which is also biblical, is going to be the more effective route in the long run for Christians viewing it and unbelievers viewing it. You know what I mean?
Sure, but I wouldn't make a rule of it because I'd say it's like a case-by-case basis.
So it is, but there's going to be a standard there, like where the case-by-case basis is what you're matching the energy would be what you're saying there. Like you might need to increase the mirroring effect of who you're talking to specifically.
I mean, I feel like a big stumbling block is pride. So like if someone's super arrogant, super prideful, to kind of like poke at their pride and not in a way to like that I'm like
yeah,
because I want the best for them is the intention, right? That if they humble themselves, they could like you can't learn it if you're arrogant, you can't learn. The Bible's always saying be humble and meek and stuff.
Right.
So I think that can be like I think a proverb says open rebuke is better than hidden love. The wounds of a friend are faithful, and the enemy multiplies kisses. So it's easy to say things people want to hear and that they like, and they'll make you friendly. It's hard to like point out it's hard to rebuke people. And now we shouldn't hypocritically rebuke people, but I think we should rebuke people.
Yes, I don't disagree, but I think what I'm honing in on here is that in dealing with people, that a lot of times they're confused and conflicted, like these three are about the transcendental argument in general. They don't know how to overcome it, so they wait and they antagonize you to get you to act a little bit like a fool so they can write you off. You know that's happening, right? You've seen this with Darth, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of the ploy where that's also answering them according to their folly, in a sense, if you've thought about it that way.
Yeah, I've thought about that.
It recognizes.
Okay.
I talked to Darth about that, but it's also we're also human beings. We're not perfect.
Yeah,
like, I have emotions.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. You have a standard, like there's times when you're like, okay, I indulged in insulting them. I didn't really have a point behind that, except I was pissed and I just wanted to keep it. That those things happen, right? It happens.
There's like no way. Like if you talk on the internet a lot, you're gonna have a moment where you're gonna flip out because we're human beings. And so like people can just like clip that and isolate that. And then like, so that's what they do with Darth, you see? So like if they take his most worst moments and that's what they clip. So then that builds up a narrative. And then people believe the narrative. And then
that's the idea though. How many of those worst moments do you want to give them? That's what's being pointed out here, right?
It's literally it's literally impossible. I don't know. I don't care about that because
I don't know, P. Mars. Sounds like you're kind of checking out.
Well, I am because I can't do it. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's
I give you props. You do more like groundwork than someone like me, like you and Darth are out there like just taking on anybody.
People could clip me and say like they clip me all the time saying awful things, and all I want to do is like love people and be forgiving and like tell people the truth and talk about God. But people are so nasty to me that I get nasty back. But it's not like I'm just openly a jerk to people. It's like it's usually like I'm patient, and then I snap at someone. Well, I'm a human being. Like, I don't know. I'm not perfect. I don't know. So
yeah, I know it sounds like, I'm being a moralist towards you or something like in this type of argument, but there is a point where like you can admit that Darth is indulging in his insults. I've heard him do it many times.
I don't really.
Okay, you've never heard him just be like just enjoying insulting people where he doesn't even need to? Like, he's like, oh, how old are you? They're like 19. Like, 19? You sound like a 16-year-old. My gosh. Like, it gets kind of stupid sometimes. Like, when he doesn't get the answer that he wanted, like, it was going to be a 35-year-old, but it's a 19-year-old.
I have a different. I feel like when you ask someone a question and they don't answer your question, that's like, I think that's worse than like saying the N-word. I think that's horrible to do to someone. I think that's
wrong. I don't want to entertain everyone's question necessarily. I could give a good reason why that is.
Well, then you'd have to go, well, that's a loaded question. And then
you can just say, I don't want to give that information. You mean like within a scope of debate?
I mean, if we're having a debate, though, you can't. That's not fair.
Well, if you say, I'm not going to answer that in that way, and here's why, like that is fair. But
well, if you say it's like a loaded question, and then you explain why, yeah.
Or like the fact that you're pointing out that
or something, if it's irrelevant, you can say, well, you'd have to say, well, this is a loaded question. It's irrelevant. This is a loaded question. Here's why.
You're giving me an either or. I'm trying to show you how both.
That's fine. But if I ask you a fair question, then, and you don't answer, you're just telling me that you're like lying to me. You're lying. You're like, I'm just going to lie to you. That's so rude. To me, that's just like really offensive.
That's true. I'll agree with you. Here's the thing though, when someone is rude, what sparks in you that like, oh, now I need to up my rudeness? That's what I think driving at.
Rude. I think he's giving a righteous rebuke. I think you're ignoring the bad behavior, and you're focusing on Darth. And you're not.
Well, I mean, I've looked at it multiple ways, and at this point, I would say he indulges in it, but you have a different view. That's fine.
Is that there may be situations in which my quality of life is such that life is no longer preferable to death, which is how we get to issues of dignity in dying, and the notion that, you know, as an autonomous individual in charge of my own life, I should have perhaps the right to decide how and when I'm going to end my life. And then you get into the other prong of this, which was how much duty and responsibility does the rest of society have to make sure that I am not actually frivolously ending.
How much duty and responsibility does society have? These are just illusory metrics from the skeptic's worldview. These categories of duty and responsibility, they're nowhere to be found in reality except a system of people getting together and say, oh, let's make this a thing. Let's agree on this.
And then you get into the other prong of this, which was how much duty and responsibility does the rest of society have to make sure that I am not actually frivolously ending my life. Now, that went down the moral track, but it applies similarly, in my mind, to things like identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, which is the foundation of a good chunk of the transcendental arguments for the existence of God. They tend to either go down, there must be some foundation for morality. If there's not a foundation for morality, then the world cascades into just terribleness. There has to be a foundation for the laws of logic.
See how he writes off morals and ethics in that way? He doesn't understand that they're tied to his worldview completely. They're tied to his argument itself. He's just like, oh, they think they have to have an objective moral, everything goes to shit. He's just writing that off in a way that he's not understanding the devastation of having a subjective ethic at the thrust of his whole argument.
Must be some foundation for morality. If there's not a foundation for morality, then the world cascades into just terribleness. There has to be a foundation for the laws of logic, because if there's not, then we're in this terrible, incoherent worldview that is just arbitrary, and we
framing what Jay is saying and pointing out to him, which is actually devastating to him as a skeptic, and he's framing it in a way where Jay's being absurd, saying, oh, if you don't listen to me, you're going to be in a terrible place and the world's going to end. It's just like you pointed out, it's just optics here, coping and optics going on right now.
Ending my life. Now, that went down the moral track, but it applies similarly, in my mind, to things like identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, which is the foundation of a good chunk of the transcendental arguments for the existence of God. They tend to either go down, there must be some foundation for morality. If there's not a foundation for morality, then the world cascades into just terribleness. There has to be a foundation for the laws of logic, because if there's not, then we're in this terrible, incoherent worldview that is just arbitrary, and we could have no confidence that we are correct. And ages ago, I kind of solved this for myself, and actually for the side debate, that's where I kind of introduced this notion of maximal confidence, which may or may not be absolute, may not have.
Yeah, he solved it.
He solved it, dude.
How do I express faith and confidence without drawing in any unity? I'll dress it up with a spectrum.
Where can I read? I'll ask Grok. Where can I read Matt Dillahunty's paper on, what is it? Maximal confidence?
Maximal certainty, maximal confidence. He's just sidestepping the problem, isn't he? Maximal relies on some sort of foundation or some sort of truth that exists, that stands, in order to get closer to that, which is he's calling maximal, but he's avoiding that the truth exists. So he's just sidestepping. Maximal assumes truth.
Yeah, he didn't write a paper on it, but it's just like, oh, I solved every problem in philosophy, maximal confidence, and then, I mean, I think that's what like the arrogance and the pride I'm talking about. It's like, dude, if you think you can just dismiss these things.
Yeah, he said for me, which shows too the pride or the subjectiveness, right? He's like, that's how the world works. You solve it for you, and I solved it for me, and then you go out and try to apply that and influence others. Like that's all he's really that's all he really has. If you're sitting down questioning him, he's like, yeah, I just have a specific point of observation. I have my senses, I have my experience, and for me, the truth is that I have a wife. As an example.
Yeah, grounding. But if I presuppose identity non-conformation, and ages ago I kind of solved this for myself, and actually
he's maximally confident in himself, right? He's maximally confident in himself. That's the solution. I make myself the king of what's true. Solution. Problem solved.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of pointing out what he's dressing up here. Yeah.
I kind of introduced this notion of maximal confidence, which may or may not be absolute, may not have a grounding. But if I presuppose identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, and then take that and apply it to the world, it becomes a sort of test of at least the temporal reliability of that. It's not you don't want to make the black swan fallacy of saying, hey, the laws of logic have always been right, therefore they always will be. Although I think there is a thought experiment that shows that,
I mean, he's talking about induction,
that has convinced me that they always will be, always have.
There's a thought experiment that's convinced him they always will be. So yeah. He solved induction now too. He solved David Hume.
Well, yeah, because he's the maximal authority of what he's confident in, and whatever he's confident in is true. You can trust him.
That's right. That makes sense. I've heard him say, like, I don't care what David Hume says. And this is why, because he solved this and he's decided for himself.
He was maximally confident when he said it. You could hear the confidence. It's true.
I heard.
Therefore, they always will be. Although I think there is a thought experiment that shows that has convinced me that they always will be, always have been, and would be in the absence of everything, because you would have to assume they were true in order to try to show that they weren't, or something else. You'd have to assume something that I think becomes equivalent. But we began with this notion of I make presuppositions. And I fully acknowledge I'm presupposing the foundations of logic, or the laws of logic, however they want to call it. And I'm presupposing that you and I share a reality, that while I don't have a solution to the problem of hard solipsism, I have some kind of anecdotal ideas. Like, it would be absurd to me personally to think that I've written every great song, every great book, and every terrible song, that I have both been the person on this end of the phone and the caller who was obnoxious and completely clueless and embarrassing that I'm doing this to myself, or that I am both me and the two of you who are educating me on things that I don't understand. The mere fact that somebody can teach me something that I didn't previously know, and then I can go back, assuming we presuppose that history is reliable, and I can go back and find where, you wrote this 10 years ago, long before I had any understanding of it, or somebody wrote it 50 years ago, long before I was ever born. Those things are at least, maybe, I don't know the correct terminology, perhaps mild defeaters for the problem of hard solipsism, but they're still contingent on my presuppositions that there's a reality and history and all this other stuff. So we start this debate off, and I'm willing to acknowledge those presuppositions, and so is he. And then he went on to suggest that near the end, in something that was almost mind-blowing, that presuppositions are not things that you presuppose absent some epistemic warrant, but are in fact justified or warranted through this. And I can't remember exactly how he described it. One of you probably will. But this was after I had been accused of being wrong about skepticism, wrong about debates.
Because we disagree about our presuppositions. So if presuppositions aren't something, God is a presupposition. So why are you asking for evidence of God?
wrong about presuppositions,
right?
Wrong about transcendentals, wrong about metalogic, wrong about, I was like, at one point in the debate, I just kind of smiled and said, yeah, let's find another way to call me stupid.
But why does that make him smile though? Like, is he smarter than that and he hasn't revealed it yet? Is he going to reveal how he knows better than that in this debate? He's called these guys because he doesn't know what happened. So, I mean, I'm glad he's laughing about this, but did he not act stupid in that debate?
He kind of took, it's like, oh, no, I'm not doing that. Yes, actually you were. You were basically saying, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And it was
based on your own testimony, Matt. All he did was said, okay, you're a skeptic. I've heard your spiel before. And he pitched it back to you and showed you why it doesn't work. And you want to turn that into, oh, you're calling me stupid? Well, what do you call it what you want?
It's strange to be told that I'm wrong about skepticism when it's, now maybe we were using the word in two different contexts.
Well, here's what I think it's fair to say he's stupid, because when we're talking about God, we're talking about metaphysics. God is metaphysical claim. So Matt, I guess he knows a lot about science, but science isn't metaphysics. So,
well,
why
does science rely on metaphysics?
He presents himself as like some expert debater on God, but shouldn't he know like basic metaphysical things? So, I mean, I think you should be shamed if you're a public figure debating metaphysics who doesn't know metaphysics.
Do you think we should toilet paper his house as well, P. Mars? Where does it end?
No.
Why not?
Well, it's because like he's a false teacher. Like atheists are already doing that. Did you see the whole thing about the evidence claims video? But the atheists made Alex O'Connor made a video exposing Matt Dillahunty for, because when people say things that aren't true and they present themselves as experts, I think, yeah, we should tell the truth about that.
Yeah.
Entirely, or maybe he was just making shit up. I don't know. You were basically saying, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And it was strange to be told that I'm wrong about skepticism when it's, now maybe we were using the word in two different contexts entirely.
Yeah. Jay Dyer was using the traditional philosophy and he understood it and understands skepticism better than you do, the one who calls himself a skeptic.
Yeah, he was using skepticism to say, like, I'm skeptical the Bible's true. I'm a skeptic.
Convenient skepticism, sure.
See,
maybe he was just making shit up. I don't.
Maybe he's making stuff up. I have the video and I could critique it, but I'd rather just say maybe he's making stuff up.
He's still getting embarrassed today. I'm telling you, you should check out this. There's this whole like back and forth with him and like an actual philosopher and Alex O'Connor. They pointed out like how dumb he is, and it's like I think it's good. Like, look, if I'm saying something stupid, I would want someone to tell me, so I don't keep like being an idiot. He's been a total, like, I'm not saying this to be mean, but like that's the reality. He's said things that are grossly dumb, like wrong, super wrong, to the point, like foolish things for years, and confident. So I don't know. Like Jay Dyer was trying to tell him in a nice way, and he doesn't care, and whatever.
Oh, you might think that like smashing him in even harder than Jay Dyer did, adding some fervor onto it would have done the job, perhaps.
I don't know what would have done the job, but now he's being publicly shamed by Alex O'Connor, who's not Christian, for making mistakes in philosophy. So we try to point these things out to him, and I don't know what you do.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that sometimes you feel the need, like you just gotta like body slam somebody because they're not getting it. You try every different way and they're not getting it.
Your intention, like, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you're a jerk and like you want to put yourself like superior to others, or are you doing it because you like actually care about them? Like the intention matters.
Yes.
No. But the two that hit me the strongest were this notion of debates, where he thinks a debate, one side comes up and says, yes, this is true, and the other side comes up and says, no, this is not. Whereas I tend to view it as that's one type of debate. Another type of debate is the traditional debate where there is a question and a resolution that one side is arguing in favor of. And the other side doesn't necessarily have to argue that the resolution is in fact false, but you can argue, my position isn't there is no God. My position is your justification for God does not warrant that belief. And so it becomes an argument not about whether or not God exists, but about whether or not you are warranted in accepting God exists. And so in that case, he would say, yes, I'm warranted. And I would say, no, you're not. And now there's a yes and a no.
And how's he going to do that?
That's the whole problem in a nutshell, is like, at the end of the day, Matt goes, I'm right because I say so. And then whoever Matt's opponent can just do the same thing.
Yeah, that's why Matt's good at speaking in emotional language and rhetoric, because that's how he uses the fact that he doesn't really have anything more than opinions or see it as anyone having more than an opinion. He's like, well, if I can speak well and frame my language right, I can convince people of my opinion.
But
yeah,
not
right. So in that case, in that sense, a debate always is somebody arguing that something's true and the other person arguing that something is false. It's just that it might not be. Yeah, it's not necessarily going to be.
Those things are assumed within the debate, even if that's not the topic of debate. These guys are missing.
That's a contradiction, right? Because he's saying, well, in a debate, we assume my argument's true. Well, what's your standard of truth? What's the absolute? That's the contradiction.
Yeah.
You're assuming truth exists, but
Right.
Jesus is the truth, in my view. So are you assuming Jesus? No. Okay, well then what's the truth? Why are you busting my balls?
Yeah. Why you got to go there?
The conclusion of the argument. It might be whether it's a good argument, whether the argument actually does establish.
Oh yeah, sure. We're gonna bring
the conclusion. It might be they're saying yes, it does, and you're saying it's false that it does. And then you are taking black and white there. So I think it's probably inevitable that you have to take a black and white position in an argument. So in some sense, I think he was right about that. But I think you were right in the sense that it doesn't have to be that the conclusion is the thing that I'm arguing it's false that God exists. I could be arguing it's false that you've got an argument that shows that God exists.
Right.
Yeah, but they don't realize there's ways around that too. Like when Darth comes up against somebody who's like agnostic, they've been getting away with that for years, and he's like, he moves to pull them out of that, by asking like if he lives in a world where facts are dependent on God or not. Actually, I noticed him do that to somebody who seemed to actually snap out of it the other day. I was listening to a video, and the guy was like, yeah, I never thought about it that way. You make a good point. And I was like, wow, that's unusual.
Dude, he argued with Malpass about this.
What's that?
Him and Darth and Malpass argued about this. Yeah, and Malpass said to him, Darth said, well, if you say God hasn't made himself known to you, then you deny the God that's made himself known. And Malpass said, that's true, but I could not know that's true. That's what he said.
Well, that's where suppression is tricky, right?
That he's just conceding to Darth's point and then just like not really.
Yeah, that's cool.
It doesn't make sense. But then he's acting like he's disagreeing, but he's really not. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, this guy I was listening to with Darth was like, he was like, yeah, I hadn't thought about it the way. He's like, that's a good point. He's like, you did a good job. And I was like, wow, someone actually like listening to Darth complimenting him, saying he's wrong. I'm like, that's rare. But then like 4 or 5 minutes later, he just flipped right back. It was like, wow.
It's irrelevant if you're ignorant as to what you're doing. If you're denying God, it doesn't matter whether you're like conscious of it or not, right? Or if you're dumb and you don't, It's not like an excuse or something. I don't know why Malpass thought that was like some defeater.
It's because I think he's trying to point out that if you're trying to tell me something I'm suppressing, I can't receive it due to the suppression, which is tricky, but that's also great, because when you're pointing out someone has lack of epistemic justification and they want answers from you, you would say to them, how ought you receive my information if you don't have anything established as certain or true?
No, he's trying to argue that you can be neutral to Jesus. And Darth is saying, no, you can't, because you like affirm that he's necessary or not. And then Malpass is sort of like, well, that's true, but I could not. Maybe I don't know that he's necessary. Maybe he is necessary, but I don't know that he's necessary.
It's the phrasing. He's like, well, from your perspective, that could be true, or if that's true, how would I know? But this is where you go deeper into, like, if your epistemology is that you don't know anything, why are you asking me for answers?
Well, but he conceded that basically he isn't neutral in truth, but he could be unaware of that truth. But that's like a stupid argument. That doesn't matter, right? Because it's still true that he's not neutral.
So then Darth just says, well, then that makes Darth an authority in a sense, if he's coming into the argument with an objective truth, right? He's like, well, you already said you wouldn't know or be able to know, and I'm telling you this is the way it is, and that's that. It's like he's created a defeater for himself, is the way I'm seeing that. Is what you're picking up on it. It's making you laugh, right? Like he's
trying to argue for neutrality. Like, I could be an agnostic, but then he concedes that in truth he can't be agnostic because he would deny the God that's made himself known.
But he's saying in truth, but wouldn't he be saying, like, I don't know the conversation, but wouldn't he be saying, if the dichotomy that you're using, or the law of excluded middle and God, not God world, is true, wasn't he utilizing that line of reasoning that Darth was pitching to him, but not saying, oh yeah, you're right about that?
Darth was saying, like, you reject the God that's made himself obviously known, because he was trying to defend agnosticism. And Darth was showing that, look, there's this flaw, right? Because you can't be neutral to something that's obvious, basically. And Malpass concedes that's true. And then his counter was like, well, I could just be too dumb to know that's true. That was his counter argument.
Nice.
I think that's funny. Like, I don't get it. Like, but
yeah, I'm sure a lot of these things are realized later by these guys, just not spoken of.
I don't see how that's like a defeater. Like, he's basically, to me, conceding to what Darth is saying, because it's like, why does it matter whether you're cognitively aware of what you're doing? Like, you're still doing it, you know?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's where I see it, as that puts Darth in an authoritative position, because now he's able to tell him what he's doing, because he's conceded that he may not know.
Slightly different.
Which tends to be my view on it, and I think it's the view that largely has to prevail in this realm, because if they come up with an unfalsifiable proposition and offer their reasons why they're convinced that it's an unfalsifiable proposition, it should be sufficient for me to point out that the proposition is unfalsifiable, and therefore, by virtue of being unfalsifiable, you couldn't have possibly had an argument that warrants that belief. And you certainly couldn't place a burden of disproof on somebody to disprove something that is unfalsifiable.
So what's going on there? The term unfalsifiable, is this something that's utilized in science and empiricism that he's trying to move into philosophy?
Falsification criteria comes from Karl Popper, and it was in science there's something called the problem of demarcation, or how do you know what's science and what's pseudoscience? And so the falsification criteria was to solve that. It didn't work, but it's not meant to be applied to things outside of science. So yeah, it's a misapplication.
Yes. So this is his problem. When someone says you have an unfalsifiable claim, I'm thinking, how's that my problem that you're seeing it this way?
An unfalsifiable proposition and offer their reasons why they're convinced that it's an unfalsifiable proposition.
But then he says why they're convinced it's unfalsifiable. Why are they convinced it's unfalsifiable? You're the one claiming it's unfalsifiable. That's strange.
And offer their reasons why they're convinced that it's an unfalsifiable proposition. It should be sufficient for me to point out that the proposition is unfalsifiable.
The criteria is unfalsifiable. So it's like self-defeating if you make it universal.
I'm not sure I follow.
They want to say a proposition isn't worthy of consideration unless you can revise the proposition, right? That's what falsification is saying. So, like,
but it's category error.
You know how in science they're always like, well, if new evidence contradicts what we see, we'll change what we think is true. That's called a provisional as opposed to absolute truth. Provisional truth. So
go ahead.
Falsification is saying that, like, if we can't revise it, then it's not worthy of like consideration for science. But well, he wants to apply this universally, though.
So yeah, you take that claim itself and question it on that level, right?
Apply it to itself, like empiricism. So, like, if the claim can we falsify, is the falsification criteria falsifiable? Because if it is, that means you can revise it. And if you can revise it, that means it's unfalsifiable. So, see the contradiction?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking another way to put it might be that it's the idea of a posteriori.
Well,
and a priori knowledge.
They want to say no claim. All truth claims can be revised, but if that claim can be revised, then that means there are truth claims that can't be revised, which means that contradicts. Does that make sense?
It kind of reminds me. Yeah, it reminds me of like that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Like, what is the evidence for that claim itself?
Falsifiable, and therefore, by virtue of being unfalsifiable, you couldn't have possibly had an argument that warrants that belief. And you certainly couldn't place a burden of disproof on somebody to disprove something that is unfalsifiable.
Yeah, I think then the burden of proof would be on whether or not it's falsifiable. And that will be something you have a burden of proof in justifying. If you think that it isn't, you should explain why you think it isn't.
A lot of shoulds in here. A lot of shoulds.
Is atheism falsifiable? I mean, atheism would be unfalsifiable.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, if we just sort of pause for a second to talk about presupposition, which is a slightly different notion. We talked about transcendental argument, transcendentals. A presupposition is another one of these terms that's floated around in these discussions, and it has lots of different meanings. It means lots of different things. In the most precise context in contemporary philosophy, what it means is nothing to do with this, but it's a very distinct thing where it's a linguistic phenomena. So it's like if you say, when did you stop beating your wife? Right, that leading question. There's a presupposition in that, which is that you used to beat your wife or something. Or
that's what's being pointed out is you guys have a litany of these assumed and smuggled presuppositions that have been unchallenged. You guys are asking, when did you stop beating your wife, all over the place, in a sense. You're being challenged on that.
If I say that the cup of tea I just had was cold, then there's a presupposition of that, which is that I just had a cup of tea, right? It's about where a statement has some kind of implication that comes from it, effectively. And it's an interesting area of the philosophy of language to look at. But it's not convincing as a way of constructing tag, because unlike if I say like the the cup of tea I had was cold has as a presupposition that I had a cup of tea. Right? It's very obvious that like a linguistic connection between those two sentences. But if I say my experience is intelligible, or if I say God exists and my experience is intelligible, there's no obvious linguistic connection between those two sentences, right? It's not a case of linguistic presupposition like I just gave them, like when did you stop beating your wife has as a presupposition that you beat your wife at some point, right? There's no linguistic presupposition, so it's not that. There's a whole interesting area of the philosophy of language that I think Jay he actually referred to it at some point. This work with Peter Strawson, he goes off into that area. So it's not that, so nothing to do with that, right? So what is it, right? So, and the traditional way that the sort of apologetics distinction that we're all familiar with is that you'll have this kind of evidentialist apologetics where you're, kind of give arguments about like the age of the earth or something, and you're saying the decay rate of this whatever atom, stuff like this, and trying to show that shows you that the earth is young, or whatever this thing is, right? All the historical evidence that Jesus was resurrected or something like this, right? Evidentialist apologetics. The presuppositionalist point is supposed to be, well, what atheists do is they come along and they read evidence with their own presuppositions, their own kind of bias towards it. And that means that it doesn't matter what evidence you give them, they're always going to sort of feed it into their way of looking at the world and come up with their own conclusion. And so what you can't do is just assume that there's evidence that's neutral between those two grounds, right? There's a whole set of assumptions that people have before they look at any evidence and evaluate that. And we call those assumptions that people have presuppositions. And that's a basic distinction, is that you shouldn't, it's, I mean, I think a much better way of thinking about it is in Bayesian terms. So you've got your prior probabilities and your posterior probabilities. So
wait. Now, where is he bringing in probabilities? It's interesting when they use probabilities, because when I guess he's saying Bayesian probabilities, which might be an open-ended probability, because when I think of a probability, it's like you have a six-sided die and you roll it, you're going to get one of six numbers. But when you're talking about things of faith, like, oh, the sun will come up tomorrow, it's come up every other day, it's a high probability. That's not an actual probability. That's a faith claim that projects into the future, which, assumes induction. So this is one of those smuggles I'm questioning, like, and he's saying it's Bayesian, like he's not claiming this is his worldview. He's just bringing in ideas. That's what the philosopher does, right? Oh, I'm not saying that. But these probabilities get smuggled in often, like, oh, it's based on probabilities. I think this is a flawed response in many ways, even that's sort of general.
Darth would say you couldn't have probabilities without God, because probabilities require background information, static variable and dynamic variable, and static variable requires a stable reality. So you're back to the unchanging reality.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to handle it, for sure.
It's, I mean, I think a much better way of thinking about it is in Bayesian terms. So you've got your prior probabilities and your posterior probability. So how likely do I think a proposition is? I could call that my posterior probability. And then if you give me some evidence, I might update my the.
But he's not getting to the assumptions. He's just chunking that in there. I think it's much better to do this.
My assignment of probability to that proposition on the basis of that evidence, and that's my posterior probability. That's what I think now after I've seen the evidence. I might change my mind. I might think it's more likely or less likely after I've seen.
Yeah, it's like, what is the probability the sun will come up tomorrow? And it's an arbitrary probability. The answer they give you is going to be, in some fashion, an arbitrary probability. It's like a category error. It's like not really a probability, like a 60-year-old man talking about the sun coming up tomorrow and a 6-year-old kid talking about the sun coming up tomorrow. It begs an example of like, oh, well, the 60-year-old man has more of a basis to make the probability argument because he's lived 10 times longer than the 6-year-old. but it's a category error. It's not that either of them knows the sun is going to come up tomorrow. They're just assuming that the future will act like the past did.
Even if you see like a pen drop a billion times, it doesn't justify you that it's like 100% going to drop the billionth one time.
Right. The probability itself is open-ended, which it shows it's in the wrong category. It's a faith category. It's not a mathematical category alone.
Some evidence. And it seems to me that's basically the difference between a presupposition and a kind of something that you arrive at after an argument or some evidence or something. Like, so to me, there's nothing particularly special about presuppositions. They're just beliefs that you have, that you...
He's just going to say, oh, there's just beliefs you have. He's just going to write them off.
You know, before we start talking about something in particular, there's a bunch of things that I believe. There's nothing special about them, not about transcendental categories or anything.
Yeah. See, he's just coping. Like, I don't want to be challenged on this stuff. My degree in philosophy does not accommodate this.
Like he's just relabeling them, right?
Yeah, or just repackaging them, or just saying, well, no one can really figure it out, so let's just move past it type of idea. It's like, well, no, the guy that you're creating the stream, Jay Dyer, the reason you created this is because you have someone who's articulate and challenging them and coming to you with a worldview that's saying, I have the truth, and you're suppressing it. So just to try to throw that away and say you don't like it, and you don't want to do that, you're not solving the problem.
Particular, they're just things that it's a kind of operational distinction about what happens before a conversation and what happens at the end of a conversation.
And obviously, if you take that to the absurd with him and say, oh, that's cool. Well, since presuppositions are just things we believe and they're not really important, you just come up with whatever you want.
He's going back to the neutral territory too, right? Like, oh, we all just agree on these things that are true. Then we argue from those things we all agree on.
Yeah, dialectics. He wants to start with an agreement, and when you don't, he's in trouble.
Yeah, you can probably explain that better than I can, I think.
No, I mean that was very precise. I especially like the linguistic angle that you put in there. When Matt and Jay were talking about presuppositions, they suddenly they were at loggerheads, because what Matt means by presupposition is what I and a lot of people would mean by presupposition, which is it is something that you presuppose. It is not something that you have arrived at. It is an underived commitment that you have. It's something that you take to be true.
Well, is that true with presupposing God, P. Mars?
I don't understand. So why ask us for evidence if God's a presupposition?
Yeah, I mean, that's what effectively they're doing to themselves here. But I think people overlook the point that you position the presupposition of God upon revelation. Like, that's what Van Til discovered and put out there. He's like, you did in the idea of like you represent or rearrange the way you think about the world, and realizing that, yes, of course, presupposing God is the correct view.
Well, our presuppositions come from the Bible. Their presuppositions come from their mind.
But what I'm saying is, he's saying, oh, presuppositions are things that you don't establish. They just are, in a sense. But I'm saying, like, you can actually reposition a realized or revealed presupposition as a primary or ultimate. Well,
in his view, that's true. In their view, from a secular point of view, that's where it is. It's like the worldview buffet. They just assume things. That's what they do. So he's right from his point of view. He is technically right, but
I'm saying, even in his view, don't you think Ozzy has realized or discovered things and then categorized them as more of a primary presupposition than other things?
Okay, but he would have like knowledge, but his knowledge would lack ultimate context. So he has like a type of knowledge, but it's like it lacks ultimate context because he denies the ultimate context.
but you didn't derive that. And this is how it's used, something that I and a lot of people would mean by presupposition, which is it is something that you presuppose. It is not something that you have arrived at. It is.
But so right there, something you presuppose you didn't arrive at. Don't you arrive at things as life goes on, that you rearrange that which you presupposed?
No, he's saying like we start with metaphysical assumptions, so you don't demonstrate your metaphysical assumptions the way you demonstrate like inductive, deductive. That's what I'm saying. It's like a transcendental argument, because you don't demonstrate a transcendental through induction, deduction, and abduction. You can't. Remember when I said that? Those arguments can't conclude with the transcendental.
Right.
So the transcendentals are what's necessary for the arguments, for those arguments. That's why they can't prove transcendentals. So you have to do the nonlinear argument. So, but because they're dogmatically refute. They won't consider starting with revelation. They won't consider it. So they're saying we all just arbitrarily assume these things. But then if they're also saying that, then they also have the critique of like, well, why are you asking for evidence of God if you're saying, well, I just arbitrarily assume atheism?
Yeah, it becomes a defeater. I agree. I think I'm trying to hone in on something here, maybe ineffectively, but what I'm trying to say is on the screen there, like he's saying you presuppose it's not something you've arrived at. So I'm thinking Van Til. Like Van Til would be the philosopher who presupposes God, but you would say to Van Til, you didn't always claim that you presupposed God, right?
Well, we would say
outright you didn't.
We don't reason to revelation; we reason from it, right? He'll say that.
Well, what? Yeah.
So
I guess it's a matter of recognition, though. Like you haven't always argued that you presuppose God, but you do now, and you reflect back and realize that you were already presupposing him, but not recognizing that you were presupposing him.
Okay, so like we don't demonstrate our presuppositions with like a science experiment or a logical argument, right? So how do we demonstrate? So how do we demonstrate them? We say, like without this presupposition, demonstration is impossible, or something like that. I lost my train of thought.
Well, you don't see what I'm saying though. Like Van Til wouldn't, so in a sense, discovered the idea of presupposing God and then applied it to his argumentation. But he would also say, I did presuppose God, I just didn't formally address it in such a way. And you presuppose God, unbeliever, but you're suppressing it in unrighteousness. You actually also presuppose God.
Yeah. He would say they live in a way. They live as if God exists while they, like, I guess, mentally deny him or something.
Mm-hmm.
Underived commitment that you have. It's something that you take to be true, but you didn't derive that. And this is how it's used in presuppositional apologetics, for instance, right?
If I can for a second, I know you're on
Sure.
this. It felt to me like he seemed to be confusing presupposition with premise, because the premise of an argument could actually be the conclusion of another argument, and yet we would put it in there. And so if you're doing something like a reductio, you would assume a premise for the sake of showing that it's wrong. That is, I think there was kind of an equivocation there with his view of presupposition that, oh, this is a premise of my argument which may be warranted through something else.
Right. I think that's right. You were obviously.
Our presupposition is in the art, so the worldview is in premise one. So maybe I think that's what Matt's talking about, that we insert our whole worldview into premise one. So because it's an argument about presuppositions.
Yeah.
Obviously not talking the same language when you were using presupposition. So what I think you meant by presupposition was something like some commitment, something that we believe to be true, that we take to be true, but that it isn't derived from anything else, right? It's where we start. It's like an axiom. The ball gets rolling on the basis of having assumed this thing to be true.
They're missing the ultimate presupposition. They're just talking about general presuppositions, axioms, right?
Yeah, we say it's like an axiom. I get. Well, again, I guess from their view, because this is again their worldview. From their perspective, we can't demonstrate anything metaphysics. So metaphysics are just something we take for granted. That's their view. We're saying, hold on, Jesus is the metaphysical like truth, the authority of truth. Jesus is making metaphysical claims, and we can prove it. So that's where we disagree. But whether or not we can demonstrate a metaphysical claim, they want to say it's impossible. We say it's possible through Christ.
Yeah, for them to say from their worldview it's impossible to demonstrate, how would they have exhausted that?
That's why it's anti-skeptical, because when they say something's impossible, they have to stand on the Bible. Because God, Jesus determines what's possible.
You could say something like, "Why are you borrowing from my worldview?" If they made a claim like that, you haven't exhausted the idea of what is possible and impossible. You can't do that.
I would say you're using a word that belongs to Jesus. The word possible. You just use the word possible. That word belongs to Jesus. What determines what's possible and impossible if it's not Jesus?
Yeah, they're not going to like that.
And just actually, this ties into this business of properly basic beliefs that I would endorse, because I think that everything that we believe it rests on a fact.
You said like that I would endorse. This is like a sales pitch for them.
Every time it's like narcissism, dude.
Yeah, like I'm educated, I'm smart, so I'm going to endorse this, even though I can't really know anything, but this is what I'm going to sell.
That I would endorse, because I think that everything that we believe it rests on a foundation, so to speak. I'm using the word foundation very figuratively there. We're not really a foundationalist, but it rests on. You can also use a network of beliefs that are
coherentism. I don't want to say foundationism, because I'm just I can't make a commitment, but I want you to believe me.
Are unwarranted, and in fact, I don't just think that
he's talking about what I was talking about. Like, we have these beliefs that are epistemically privileged, like induction is true. Well, we want to say God is epistemically privileged, and they go, "No, you can't do that." According to what,
Right. He's admitting he has unwarranted beliefs, dogmatic beliefs. But right, I don't like your God belief, and I'm going to argue with yours.
Properly basic beliefs are unwarranted. You can also use a network of beliefs that are unwarranted. And in fact, I don't just think that these properly basic beliefs are unwarranted. I think they're unwarrantable. There is no way to warrant them, to discharge them.
In order for me to come to terms with my own silly philosophy, I've got to say that there's no way to do it. Even though, again, I can't exhaust the way I concluded that. But I just want to say that because it makes me feel better about my unwarranted dogmatic philosophy that I'm pitching you right now. That I'm
actually giving us what we want in tag. He's conceding that without revelation, they can't know anything. He's literally saying,
right. There's so many answers being given right now in what he's saying that speak to someone who studies presuppositions. But this is great, actually, what he's saying right now.
You can't even vindicate them after the fact. Whereas I think Jay was thinking of something else entirely. So I don't know what to think there. That it I
think this, Ozzy, what you just said gives Jay Dyer the availability to say, "Oh, okay. Well, my presupposition is ultimate. It's God. So all the things you rely on, all this reality starts with God, and that trumps whatever you're bringing to the table because it's under God." Based on what you just said there about presuppositions, assumptions, dogmatic, unwarranted beliefs. You just conceded the argument and apparently didn't realize it.
At the time, when I was watching, in fact, I even sent you a message saying, "What the heck? I just watched this thing, and I'm gobsmacked by the fact that he thinks that you can justify presuppositions. I mean, presuppositions are the very things that you don't justify."
There you go again. God's my ultimate presupposition. Don't ask me to justify it.
Good, Matt. Did you see Matt?
But
how smug Matt looked there. Did you see that?
Well, you know why, right? If he applied what I just said, then he would be like, "Oh, dang, I can't even argue with Jay Dyer." But he's thinking about something else, isn't he? What the hell is he thinking?
he thinks that you can justify presuppositions. I mean, presuppositions are the very things that you don't justify. But he might have been using it in the sense that you're saying.
It's like, teacher gave me a good grade. Do you see that look? Teacher just gave me a good grade.
Yeah, well, I get a very different read from what's happening here. But yeah, I don't know what he thinks. Why is that good for him to say?
He confirmed. Okay, so someone who's educated, masters.
No, I know that, Primars. I'm saying, like, think about what he just told him, though. Like, presuppositions are even justified. So if he was thinking about this, like, oh, it's a Jay Dyer ultimately presupposes God, so I can't even ask him for justification.
That doesn't matter. All he heard was I was right.
Well,
you might not in any particular moment be justifying them, but they are something that could be vindicated later on, or that could have been derived, and they are merely presupposed for the time being for this argument towards this conclusion.
And I don't know which was more shocking, the fact that we came across this dramatic...
Like, presupposed for this argument. What did I say? They agree. Well, agree this is true, and then argue.
Yeah.
Different view of what a presupposition is, or that we began with talking about presuppositions and both acknowledging that we were using them, and then 2 hours later we find out we mean something dramatically different. Alex has something to mention.
Well,
and talking about presuppositions and both acknowledging that we were using them, and then 2 hours later
he's missing that. Yeah, we agree that we use them. We agree that we have them. We disagree with the presupposition itself.
You know what's annoying? This reminds me of, like, okay, I had a debate about the Christian God is necessary for intelligibility, right? And then the guy just defines intelligibility to be, well, I can understand 2 + 2 = 5, therefore it's intelligible. Well, that's what we're talking about, you know? So in the next debate, I made sure I sent him, like, the definition of intelligibility that we're talking about. Like, you can know things in a non-arbitrary way, that, like, the concepts connect to the real world. And he still, it was like we're talking past, like, he agreed to that definition, and then the whole debate he used the, like, intelligible means I can understand it. It's like, what? So even, like, when you make an effort, I made an effort, and it didn't even matter.
Yeah, that's going to continue to happen too, unfortunately. I think I'm gassed out of this one. It's a good one, though. We can finish it.
I think I need to go to bed. It's getting pretty late, but that was I'm gonna try and clip this video and maybe upload this to my channel. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and we might come back to it if you want to. It's a good one.
All right, man. Thanks. Have a good night.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you. Take care, brother. I will. I'm just gonna put on some music. I guess if it's too late. Yeah, it's gonna be it. So I'm just gonna play some music on the way out. Thanks for hanging out, Peter and Whitney, Chris, Vartman, I guess. hopefully you guys are learning something. I know you guys are chatting, so maybe you're not paying attention, but PMARS has a lot of good insights and good understanding on these matters. Peter does as well. So thanks for pointing out a lot of things in the side chat, Peter. I was noticing things, but it takes a lot of focus, this particular discussion. So I'm kind of worn out. You can probably tell from my voice. But we might revisit this and finish it. But even if not, there's plenty of these discussions everywhere. It's all good. But yeah, take care, guys. God bless.